Introduction: The illusion of the Newtonian slave. Listen closely to the frequency of your own exhaustion. You have been born into a thermodynamic prison entirely constructed by a mathematical lie. From the earliest moments of your biological assembly, your nervous system was formatted with the primitive operating system of classical Newtonian physics. You were taught that the universe is a dense mechanical clockwork of physical matter, and that to alter your reality, you must exert continuous physical friction against it. You were indoctrinated to believe that wealth, power, and absolute freedom belong to those who push the hardest, bleed the longest, and surrender their kinetic energy to the grinding gears of the system. This is the illusion of the Newtonian slave. Under this archaic tyranny, the ordinary human being operates as a pathetic, isolated entity. He believes he is a helpless victim of external circumstances. He looks at the immense topography of his ambitions and feels crushed by the spatial and temporal distances separating him from his victory. He exhausts his finite biological battery trying to move atoms with his bare hands, completely blind to the true, terrifying architecture of the cosmos. The three-dimensional world you perceive is not solid reality. It is a lagging holographic projection. The true universe, the back end of creation, is the unified field. It is a mathematically perfect, frictionless quantum server that strictly obeys the laws of wave mechanics, superposition, and entanglement. It does not respond to your physical sweat. It does not respond to your tears or your moral justifications. It responds exclusively to the acoustic pressure of your observational authority. This transmission is not a philosophical debate. It is a forced system update. In the following 12 vectors, we will systematically uninstall the obsolete software of the passive observer from your neural circuitry. We will eradicate the psychological malware of hope, competition, and logistical panic. We will replace it with the icy dictatorial physics of the quantum architect. You will learn to collapse the wave function of your destiny. You will learn to extract capital from absolute nothingness, and you will bend the geometric fabric of space-time to force the universe to render your unquestionable authority. Stop pushing the shadows on the wall. Retreat to the control console. The quantum rendering engine is online. The isolation chamber is sealed. Listen, assimilate, and execute. Chapter 1. The Superposition of Failure, Annihilating the Passive Observer. In the immense, cold, and mathematically perfect architecture of the unified field, the greatest, most devastating miscalculation ever executed by the human psyche has been the adoption of classical physics to solve the absolute problems of a quantum universe. We must observe the ordinary individual, the biological entity, whom throughout this operational manual we shall classify with a clinical detached contempt as the inert particle, or the passive observer. From the earliest stages of his cellular and cognitive assembly in the factories of standard civilian education, this individual has been aggressively indoctrinated under the Newtonian dogma. He has been systematically programmed to believe that the three-dimensional universe is a gigantic, deterministic, and unfeeling clockwork mechanism. He operates under the tragic hallucination that external macroscopic forces, the global economy, the genetic lottery, the government, or the mythical concept of fate act upon his body, pushing him relentlessly through time as if he were nothing more than a passive, helpless billiard ball rolling across a green felt table. Under the paralyzing hypnosis of this obsolete 17th century model operates the inert particle in his daily, exhausting life cycle. I want you to observe the exact radiography of his operational agony. When the inert particle faces a monumental fork in the trajectory of his destiny, whether it is the decision to start a multi-million-dollar corporate empire, the necessity to abandon a parasitic, low-frequency relationship, or the mandate to make a massive, irreversible capital investment, his nervous system fails. Atrophied by the lifelong illusion of fatality and external control, his processor enters a state of catastrophic analytical paralysis. Instead of issuing a direct, dictatorial command to the local matrix, the individual sits in the waiting room of the cosmos. He opens his mouth and utters the phrases that act as absolute thermodynamic death sentences. He says, "Let us wait and see what happens." He says, "I am simply waiting for a signal from the universe." He whispers to himself, "If it is truly meant to be, it will naturally be." And most destructively of all, he declares, "I am going to keep my options open just in case." The inert particle genuinely believes that the universe is a benevolent, independent, and conscious entity that is secretly drafting a magnificent master plan for his life behind the curtains of reality. He believes that linear time, if left to its own devices, will magically resolve the dilemma and present him with a golden bridge toward his ultimate success. What this individual ignores, with an astrophysical blindness that permanently condemns him to a life of absolute irrelevance, is that the unified field possesses absolutely no will of its own. The universe has no plans for you. It has no preferences regarding your victory or your destruction. And above all, the primordial void completely lacks the capacity to make decisions. The quantum vacuum is an infinite boiling ocean of energy at rest. It is a massive, obedient server that is literally sitting in the dark, completely paralyzed, waiting for a user with administrator privileges to enter a specific, non-negotiable query into the database. When you sit on your couch, folding your hands to wait and see what happens, the entire universe stops its machinery. It looks at you with the exact same cold, mechanical indifference with which a blank search engine waits for you to type a word. It will wait for decades. It will let you age, wither, and turn to dust while waiting for a command that never arrives. By not defining your absolute objective, by explicitly refusing to issue an exact measurement with the violent gravity of your will, you forcefully condemn your own existence to float endlessly in a dense fog of indeterminacy. To this mathematical tragedy, where the potential of a human life dissolves into a chaotic fan of infinite simultaneous disappointments, we shall assign a precise technical term. We call it the superposition of failure. To dismantle the blasphemy of human passivity and to awaken the terrifying creative tyranny of the quantum architect within your nervous system, we must permanently abandon the psychology of fate. We must dive into the pure, unforgiving mathematics of wave mechanics. We must understand exactly how physical matter operates in the dark before it is forced by an observer to exist. We must discover the most mind-blowing, terrifying, and empowering phenomenon of the cosmic fabric, quantum superposition. In the subatomic realm, the invisible geometric substrate that composes 100% of the physical reality you touch, the offshore capital you crave, and the biological body you currently inhabit, particles do not exist as solid objects with defined, permanent positions. Before a conscious observer fixes their relentless attention upon them, these particles exist purely as probability waves. In the 1920s, the brilliant physicist Erwin Schrödinger formulated the mathematical equation that describes the behavior of the universe in this spectral, undecided state. In its purest and most dictatorial form, the wave equation dictates the evolution of the wave function, represented by the Greek letter psi. Do not allow the abstract nature of theoretical physics to intimidate your intellect. What this majestic equation dictates is that the wave function contains all the dynamic information about a given system. But here lies the omega-level cryptographic secret. The wave function does not describe where an electron physically is located. It describes the mathematical probability of finding that electron in an infinite number of possible locations at the exact same time. As long as the system is isolated and completely undisturbed by an observer or a measurement instrument, the particle is literally in a state of superposition. It exists here, there, in a positive energetic state, in a negative energetic state, rich, poor, victorious, and utterly destroyed, all simultaneously. It is a mathematical ghost. It is a blurry cloud of cosmic maybe. The human inert particle, through his profound ignorance of mechanics, transfers this quantum phenomenon directly to the macroscopic scale of his own life. When the individual refuses to commit to a singular and absolute decision, for example, when he tells himself, "I want to be a multimillionaire, but I also desperately want the safety of my mediocre corporate salary, and I absolutely do not want to risk my comfortable free time," he is forcefully dividing his energetic emission. He is mathematically forcing the wave function of his own destiny to remain in a state of superposition. His physical reality instantly becomes a blurry cloud. This is the exact physical and thermodynamic reason why the passive observer feels chronic, suffocating anxiety. Modern society treats anxiety as a psychological disorder requiring medication or gentle therapy. The quantum architect understands that anxiety is not a disorder. It is the brutal biological agony of a nervous system that is being mercilessly stretched across infinite probable timelines. You are actively attempting to inhabit the timeline of success, the timeline of failure, the timeline of humiliation, and the timeline of glory at the exact same millisecond, without anchoring your mass to any of them. Your cells are vibrating with the friction of undefined coordinates. And the ecosystem, which operates under the unyielding law of entropy, the natural universal tendency toward chaos and disorder, dictates a lethal rule for macroscopic superpositions. If you keep your options open for too long, the probability cloud will not magically collapse into your golden victory. The probabilities of supreme success, market domination, and elite physical health require concentrated energy, or syntropy, to materialize. They are highly unnatural states of extreme order. The probability of failure, mediocrity, and poverty, however, requires absolutely zero energy. Therefore, if you remain passive, the unified field will simply execute the algorithm of least energetic resistance. It will download the easiest file. It will collapse your reality into absolute stagnation. This is the superposition of failure. The most famous thought experiment in the history of quantum physics, designed by Erwin Schrödinger himself, illustrates this paralysis with perfect cinematic violence. It is the paradox of Schrödinger's cat. Imagine a living cat locked inside a completely opaque, heavily armored steel box. Beside the animal there rests a lethal, automated mechanism, a single radioactive atom that possesses exactly a 50% probability of decaying within the next hour. If the atom decays, it triggers a sensor that activates a heavy mechanical hammer. The hammer shatters a glass vial filled with a deadly poison gas, and the cat dies instantly. If the atom does not decay, the mechanism remains silent and the cat lives. According to the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, as long as that steel box remains hermetically sealed and no conscious observer looks inside, the radioactive atom remains in a state of superposition. It has both decayed and not decayed at the exact same time. Therefore, the trigger mechanism is both activated and deactivated, and, by macroscopic extension, the cat inside the box is both alive and dead at the same time. It is only in the exact violent microsecond in which the observer opens the heavy lid of the box and looks inside that the wave function permanently collapses. The universe is mathematically forced by the observer's gaze to choose a single, irreversible state. The cat either jumps out alive, roaring with vitality, or it lies motionless and dead. The inert particle lives his entire financial, romantic, and professional existence with the box hermetically sealed. Faced with the prospect of a gigantic corporate project, an aggressive capital investment, or a high-stakes vocation, the biological host prefers the safe, warm ignorance of the closed steel box. He prefers to sit on his couch and fantasize that the millionaire project is entirely possible. He loves the feeling of potential, but he never ever takes the definitive step. He never signs the contract, he never burns his financial ships, and he never commits his capital because he is absolutely terrified of opening the box and finding the cold corpse of his own failure. He lives permanently in the cosmic paradox. In order not to face the potential death of his illusions, he deliberately chooses to keep his financial Schrödinger's cat in a hybrid state of a quantum coma. He whispers to himself in the dark, "As long as I do not truly try with all my might, I have not truly failed." The quantum architect looks at this psychological cowardice with clinical, absolute contempt. The sovereign knows that a half-alive and half-dead cat cannot hunt in the jungle of the matrix. A corporate empire that remains strictly in the idea phase generates exactly zero revenue. A strategic relationship kept casual so as not to get hurt does not produce the impenetrable electromagnetic shield of extreme loyalty. The architect is not afraid of the steel box. The architect is the hammer. He walks directly toward the armored box of quantum uncertainty and kicks the lid open with explosive kinetic force. He forces the universe to deliver a concrete result. If, upon opening the box, the cat is dead and the business venture fails catastrophically, the architect does not shed a single tear. He does not write poetry about his loss. He treats the failure as a simple data extraction process. He processes the thermodynamic friction of the failure, buries the corpse without a funeral, upgrades his internal algorithms, and immediately designs a new, more lethal experiment. He then walks to the next box and rips it open with the exact same sociopathic coldness. He knows that the only mathematical way to guarantee finding a live cat, a lethal and roaring beast of an empire, is by opening boxes at a speed and with a violence that the delicate nervous system of the inert particle could never physically endure. The thermodynamic transmutation from the inert particle to the quantum architect marks the definitive, irreversible abandonment of hope as a valid life strategy. The architect assimilates with icy lucidity and mathematical tyranny that the unified field is not a judge sitting on a throne evaluating his moral merits or his hard work. The unified field is a precision mirror reflecting his exact level of directional determination. He completely repudiates the concept of waiting. He understands that if physical matter is 99.9% fluctuating empty space, he is not subject to the laws of matter. Matter is desperately waiting for his instructions. He assumes the execution of quantum sovereignty, the quantum leap, and the authority of the measuring device. To fully comprehend the absolute, terrifying power of the architect, you must understand what the act of observing truly means in the realm of quantum physics. When particle physicists perform the double-slit experiment, which remains the most terrifying and reality-breaking experiment in modern science, they fire individual electrons toward a solid barrier that contains two narrow vertical slits. If there is no detector present, if no instrument is actively measuring which slit the electron passes through, the particle acts purely as a wave of probability. It passes through both slits at the exact same time, interferes with itself, and creates a complex interference pattern on the back wall. The electron behaves like a blurry, undefined fog of potential. But at the exact millisecond, the physicists place a measuring instrument, a camera or a sensor, to observe exactly which slit the electron passes through. The entire universe enters a state of mathematical panic. The wave function collapses instantaneously. The electron immediately stops being a probability wave spread through space and space-time. It condenses. It becomes a solid, hard and concrete piece of matter, passing through only one single slit. The simple, silent act of looking with a focused intention altered the fundamental nature of physical matter. The quantum architect is the most sophisticated high-voltage measuring device in the known universe. His mind is not a passive receiver of environmental information. It is a reality-collapsing laser. When the architect decides that he will dominate an industry, forge an exoskeleton of impenetrable steel, or accumulate massive offshore capital, he does not issue a wish. A wish is a weak, unfocused and pathetic wave that dissipates into thermal noise. He issues a deterministic measurement. He fixes his attention on the final, consummated result, with a gravitational density so monstrous that the mathematical probabilities of the room physically change. He eliminates Plan B. He eliminates the phrase, just in case. In quantum physics, eliminating the second slit of the barrier forces the electron to pass through the specific slit you decided upon. The architect systematically seals all escape doors in his own mind. By executing this cognitive lockdown, he transmits a deafening command to the unified field. There are no open options. There is no superposition in this sector. There is only a single timeline authorized to materialize in my spatial vector, and it is the timeline of absolute domination. The quantum universe, violently stripped of its alternative roots by the observer's implacable, unyielding will, has no thermodynamic alternative but to collapse the immense fog of cosmic energy into the three-dimensional, dense, and bright form that the architect has dictated. Matter obeys concentrated sociopathic attention with the exact exact same mathematical submission with which gravity obeys mass. However, to sustain this reality hacking, one must conquer the grandest optical illusion of the simulation, the illusion of linear time and the concept of instant transmission. One of the most destructive breaks keeping the inert particle perpetually trapped in its state of superposition is its absolute submission to the illusion of Newtonian time. The passive observer genuinely believes that his success, his sprawling empire, or his biological healing are located far off in the distant future. He calculates the chronological distance separating him from his goal, and upon seeing the temporal gap, his analog brain doubts his capacity to cross the abyss. And the very moment he doubts, he returns the wave function back to the blurry cloud state. He undoes the collapse. The quantum architect must violently eradicate this linear perception from his motherboard. In advanced quantum field theory, time is not a river flowing relentlessly from the past toward the future. Space-time is a singular, unified block of information. All possible configurations of matter, you broken and bankrupt today, you as a billionaire 10 years from now, you as the absolute, untouchable monarch of your entire lineage, exist simultaneously as dormant potentials in the back end of the unified field. When you issue a deterministic measurement, an irrevocable decision of absolute success, you are not sending a message via a slow courier that will take 10 years to reach the universe. You are executing an instant transmission. At the subatomic level, your consciousness collapses the probability in the absolute now. The variable has already been altered in the source code of reality. The undeniable fact that in the three-dimensional front end, the physical screen of your life, rendering time is required for the heavy atoms to arrange themselves, for the legal contracts to be signed, for the companies to scale, and for the muscular fibers to hypertrophy is simply the mechanical friction of space-time. It is the lag of the simulation. But the architect knows, with the icy certainty of a machine, that the collapse has already mathematically occurred. Therefore, he does not walk toward the future hoping to eventually achieve something. He walks through the present moment, inhabiting the hologram of the victory that is already completely assured. This unmovable, terrifying certainty is the exact thermal signature that keeps the wave function collapsed. If the architect were to doubt for a single second because of temporal impatience, if he were to look at the slow loading bar of the 3D world and feel fear, he would be lifting his gaze from the measuring instrument. The camera would turn off, and physical matter would instantly dissolve back into the blurry, chaotic haze of mediocrity. To eradicate the passive observer condition from your neural circuits and forge the collapsing authority of a quantum architect, you must install a regime of dictatorial intolerance toward ambiguity in your own life today. You have to permanently stop treating your dreams as diffuse romantic possibilities and start treating them as unnegotiable GPS coordinates. The process demands a direct, violent mathematical intervention in your behavior. You must execute the forced collapse protocol. Step 1. The annihilation of Plan B. You must close the double slit. The nature of the unified field is inherently lazy. If you give the universe an easy way out, a comfortable Plan B, the energy will automatically flow there because it requires less Eigen tropic concentration. You must execute the tactical annihilation of your lifelines. If your plan A is founding an empire that ruthlessly devours the market, and your plan B is keeping a resume updated just in case you have to crawl back to an employer, your wave function is divided. You are measuring both slits and creating catastrophic destructive interference. Burn the resume, destroy the thermal escape route. Force your limbic brain to operate strictly under the all-or-nothing directive. When the mind knows biologically that there is no quantum safety net, it collapses reality into the only slit available: survival through victory. Step 2. The act of measurement. You cannot collapse the probability wave by sitting on your sofa passively meditating. Meditation is merely the design of the blueprint. The collapse requires the injection of heavy kinetic energy into the three-dimensional world. The act of measurement is irreversible economic and physical commitment. If you decide to mutate your physique, the collapse does not happen when you buy the gym membership. It happens when you lift the iron until the fiber micro-tears. If you decide to launch a business, the wave function collapse occurs in the exact microsecond you sign a binding contract, transfer a massive payment to a supplier, or publicly announce the launch date without possessing the finished product. You put physical matter against the ropes. You inject capital, kinetic energy, or your absolute reputation into the void. By making this physical move, your status changes permanently from an inert particle that thinks to a measuring device that acts. The universe detects the massive alteration in your mass and is mathematically forced to solidify the bridge under your feet as you take the leap into the abyss. Step 3. Sustaining the observation. This is the protocol of immunity to decoherence. The fatal, pathetic error of the metaphysical amateur is that he manages to collapse the probability on a Monday, but by Wednesday, upon looking out the window and not seeing his physical empire fully assembled, he doubts. He cries. He complains that quantum physics does not work. In physics, when a highly ordered system loses its defined state by interacting with the chaotic static of the environment, it is called decoherence. Your doubt is the decoherence of your own empire. To avoid it, you must sustain a sociopathic gaze on your objective. You become entirely deaf to the temporal evidence of the physical world. If your bank account displays zeros today, you observe it with the absolute coldness of an astrophysicist looking at a residual meaningless error on a monitor. You know it is old information. You refuse to withdraw your attention from the final coordinate. The unwavering, relentless persistence of your focus is the electromagnet that keeps the atoms of your new reality cohered together. It holds them in place until the three-dimensional screen finishes loading the render. To reclaim your throne at the absolute command center of the unified field, you must murder the chronic waiter, the spiritual dilettante, and the eternal indecisive entity that currently parasitizes your prefrontal cortex. Renounce the false, toxic humility of believing you do not possess the right to demand that matter bend to your will. Matter has no opinions. Matter has no morals. It only possesses mass and probability. And probability, always without a single historical exception, kneels before the altar of absolute concentration. The next time you face the abyss of uncertainty, the next time you feel the paralyzing terror of making an irrevocable decision and feel the herbivore instinct rising in your throat, begging you to just let time resolve it, stop the fluctuation of your thoughts. Immobilize your psyche. Lower your brain frequency to electromagnetic absolute zero. Open the eyes of your will with the lethal, cutting precision of an industrial laser. Aim your measurement directly at the skull of your wildest, most terrifying ambition. Understand that the walls, the obstacles, and the agonizing distances separating you from your glory are nothing more than holographic mist, waiting obediently for your command to dissipate into nothingness. When you learn to look at reality not as a solid brick wall, but as a fluid, mathematical ocean of possibilities begging for the dictatorship of your attention, you will cease to be a castaway blindly bouncing against the quantum foam. You will have transmuted, by the unappealable, absolute right of wave collapse, into the quantum architect. You will become the focused singularity for whom uncertainty simply does not exist. There only exists the obedient, terrifying abyss, which solidifies instantly into golden steps in the exact calculated fraction of a second in which you decide to step down. Chapter 2. The Eigen State Mandate, Forcing the Collapse of the Wave Function. In the vast, icy, and mathematically relentless structure of the unified field, human suffering is never a divine punishment, nor is it a statistical error of the cosmos. It is, strictly speaking, a pathological, structural failure in the measurement process of the individual. The ordinary specimen, the biological entity we define throughout this manual as the inert particle or the passive observer, has been heavily inoculated with a conceptual virus since its inception. This virus is designed specifically to destroy the human capacity to alter space-time. Modern society and the morality of the slave class have baptized this lethal virus with a poetic and harmless name: hope. Human beings have been systematically taught that desiring something very strongly, praying into the void for a better future, or simply having faith that external circumstances will eventually change, is the sacred, noble mechanism for attracting success. We shall call this operative tragedy, where the human mind expends monstrous amounts of thermal energy without moving a single electron in its favor, the stagnation of hope, or the quantum beggar syndrome. Observe the precise clinical X-ray of this thermodynamic impotence. The inert particle visualizes a massive financial empire, or perhaps the miraculous healing of a lethal biological disease. He reads elementary books on manifestation. He closes his eyes for exactly 20 minutes a day, and he ardently, desperately desires that physical matter will bend to his will. But in the exact, unforgiving instant he opens his physical eyes and returns his gaze to the three-dimensional screen of the world, his behavior immediately collapses back into absolute misery. He checks his bank account, and his nervous system is flooded with terror. He looks at his mundane surroundings and pities himself. He acts, he walks, and he breathes from the absolute biological premise that he has not made it yet. The inert particle operates entirely under the duality of the beggar. On one hand, he pleads with the quantum void for unmitigated wealth. On the other hand, his physical vehicle behaves exactly like a frightened, exhausted slave. He completely ignores the astrophysical truth that costs him his entire quantum sovereignty. The unified field is entirely deaf to poetry, to hope, and to human suffering. The primordial void does not understand your tears. It is a pure, unfeeling mathematical matrix operating under a single, unbreakable physical law. The universe does not deliver what you desire. The universe renders the exact specific state you are observing in the present moment with absolute mathematical tyranny. When you hope for something beautiful to happen in the future, you are emitting a lethal quantum measurement. You are explicitly confirming to the server that in the present now, you do not possess it. You are actively measuring your own scarcity. And since the act of measuring forces matter to solidify, the field obeys your transmission with terrifying fidelity. It collapses the wave function and crystallizes that exact scarcity into your daily reality. To dismantle the blasphemy of passive hope and awaken to the clinical omnipotence of the quantum architect, we must permanently abandon cheap mysticism and descend into the cold, pristine laboratories of particle physics. We must understand the exact mechanics of material creation, the observer effect, and the collapse of the wave function. In advanced quantum mechanics, matter simply does not exist as a solid, undeniable fact until it hits the hard wall of consciousness. Before an act of observation occurs, a quantum system, whether it is a single photon, a vibrating electron, or the entire architecture of your financial future, exists in a blurry superposition of all possible states. Mathematically, this infinite potential is described by a state vector, denoted in physics by the symbol psi. This vector resides in a complex multidimensional mathematical realm known as a Hilbert space. The fundamental equation of total probability dictates that the current quantum state is a linear sum of multiple potential realities. In plain text, the universe processes your life through this specific formulation. Psi maxasansars B1 PE1 plus C2 BG D2 plus C3 EE3 plus Cn Pn. In this dictatorial equation, the states represented by phi n represent all the infinite possibilities of your existence. You in a state of absolute humiliating bankruptcy is phi 1. You trapped in the frightened, exhausted middle class is phi 2. Or you ruling as the untouchable apex monarch of your entire industry is phi 3. The coefficients represented by Cn are complex numbers. The mathematical magnitude of these numbers, when squared, determines the exact probability that the universe will materialize that particular specific state into the three-dimensional grid. This is the vibratory haze, but the haze cannot interact with the dense, physical world. For a specific event to occur in your life, the quantum state must immediately stop being an infinite sum of probabilities. It must collapse into a single, concrete, solid, and completely irreversible state. What physical force forces this collapse? The act of measurement, the observer effect. When theoretical physicists perform foundational experiments like the double slit, they prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that introducing a detector, an active observer, forces the particle to permanently abandon its fluid wave state and behave exactly like a piece of hard, unyielding matter. The quantum universe is extremely shy and elusive in its infinite state, but it becomes highly instantly obedient before the tyranny of an observation lens. In the brilliant mathematician John von Neumann's formulation of quantum mechanics, when an observation is actively made, the system jumps instantly and violently from the probabilistic state of psi directly to one specific uncompromising base state. This finalized state is called the Eigen state. Here lies the omega-level cryptographic secret of your existence. Your conscious mind and your focused, unyielding attention are the most massive, powerful measurement instruments ever designed in the cosmos. The quantum architect understands deeply that he is not a separate entity watching the experiment. He is the detector. When the inert particle looks at his bank account and feels the cold sweat of terror, he is biologically acting as a detector calibrated explicitly to measure the state of Phi-1, absolute poverty. The universe reads that heavy emotional measurement and flawlessly crystallizes the corresponding Eigen state. The universe does not punish you for your sins. The unified field simply collapses reality upon the exact mathematical value that your psychological measurement instrument is currently calibrated to read. To truly master physical matter, you must understand the tragic physics of why 99% of all human attempts to alter reality fail miserably. The failure is not a flaw in quantum physics. The failure is in the analog interference of the instrument itself. The inert particle tries to collapse the probability of elite wealth. For 10 minutes a day he focuses, and his biological instrument points directly to the state of absolute success, the Phi-3 state. In that brief, beautiful quantum instant, the wave function actually begins to collapse toward the rendering of his empire. The electrons of the local universe begin the complex dance of reorganization to bring the necessary capital, the vital alliances, and the golden opportunities directly to his door. But then the meditation ends. The individual goes out into the physical world. He receives an unexpected bill. He hits a bureaucratic obstacle, and instantly herbivore terror seizes his entire nervous system. In that second, fatal millisecond, the inert particle looks at the outside world again and emits a second measurement. He tells himself, "This is not working. I knew it was too good to be true." By emitting this heavy frequency of doubt, the individual has generated an inverted quantum Zeno effect. He has introduced an entirely new act of observation. This new measurement brutally erases the previous collapse. The quantum universe intercepts this fear-based measurement. The system reads that the operator is now demanding to measure the state of failure. The field immediately stops the compilation of the empire and re-renders the three-dimensional misery. Doubt is not just an annoying, fleeting emotional state. Doubt is a root command. In particle physics applied to reality creation, doubt is a definitive cancel command executed by a system administrator. Every single time you check the physical world looking desperately for proof of your manifestation, and you get frustrated because you do not see it yet, you are performing a faulty measurement. You are opening the thermal oven before the metal has fully solidified, letting the freezing cold air rush in and permanently ruin the alloy. The quantum architect knows that he simply cannot afford the biological luxury of doubt. Doubt is a thermodynamic leak, a destructive interference pattern that violently scatters the concentrated energy of the wave collapse. To force matter to obey, the architect must develop absolute perceptual arrogance, the ability to maintain the measurement instrument locked onto that specific eigenstate, regardless of what the external simulation projects. The transmutation from passive observer to quantum architect marks the clinical, irreversible death of hope and the birth of the dictatorship of attention. The architect assimilates that the outside world is simply a low-resolution monitor showing the delayed results of past measurements. He entirely repudiates the slave habit of reacting to the screen. He understands that if he wants to change the movie, he must not scratch the glass of the monitor. He must go deep into the back end of the system and alter the observation lens. He assumes the execution of the true quantum leap, the assumption of the Eigen state and the voluntary falsification of reality. This does not require physical muscle. It strictly requires absolute mental control. Imagine the quantum architect facing a new, massive challenge. He has definitively decided to conquer a foreign market or radically heal his biology. The analog ego of the inert particle would try to plan every single step, heavily burdened by the anxiety of the how. The architect simply stops the linear motor. He executes the first protocol of quantum collapse, the annihilation of the timeline. He knows that in the pure mathematics of the unified field, the past and the future do not exist. All coordinates, all timelines, coexist simultaneously in the void. Therefore, the architect does not wish to become a monarch in 5 years. Wishing is establishing the measurement in the variable of current lack. Instead, he completely assumes the Eigen state of the consummated conquest. In the total darkness of his mind, he adjusts the quantum tuner. He isolates himself from all three-dimensional sensory stimuli. He searches the field for the exact specific state vector where the battle has already been decisively won, and the money already rests heavily in his massive vaults. Instead of looking at that state from afar, the architect actively enters it. He wears his mind with the skin of that final result. He begins to feel, walk, and breathe exclusively from that state. How does the monarch who has already conquered the entire biome react to petty criticism? He reacts with sublime boredom and dominant peace. The architect injects that exact identical emotional chemistry into his bloodstream here and now. He is executing a flawless act of reality falsification. His biological body cannot distinguish between a physically materialized event and an event measured with absolute, unwavering certainty in the mind. The brain immediately releases the neurochemistry of triumph. By establishing this specific thermal signature, the architect has just emitted the master measurement. The observation instrument has locked permanently onto coordinate Ψn. The wave function collapses. The universe feels the gravitational lash of this dictatorial decision. But the architect knows the latency of three-dimensional matter. He knows the miracle has solidified at the quantum level, but the heavy physical atoms require rendering time. Here enters the second operative protocol. Life in the collapsed state, or observer arrogance. The architect opens his eyes. The outside world still shows a low bank balance or dense physical barriers. This is the exact trap where the inert particle panics and completely undoes the collapse. The quantum architect observes these external proofs with a cold, sociopathic smile. He knows what his physical eyes see is only fossil light. It is merely the luminous trail of his old vibratory state, a late, delayed render of his old measurements. He flatly refuses to accept the outside world as his authority. He walks through the three-dimensional reality operating exclusively from the Eigen state of a success that is already consummated. He interacts with temporary debts with the attitude of a billionaire tycoon amused by a minor accounting error. By maintaining this deliberate, aggressive dissonance, a physical body inhabiting current chaos while a quantum mind operates strictly from the throne of victory, The architect corners the thermodynamics of the universe. The field must accelerate the space-time metabolism to correct the discrepancy. Probabilities collapse in an absolute avalanche. People he does not even know decide to call him. Global markets inexplicably fluctuate in his favor. Physical matter is violently forced to bend, break, and reassemble at terrifying speeds, solely to catch up and perfectly match the mathematical image the architect holds relentlessly in the lens of his measurement instrument. To eradicate quantum passivity and forge the power of a wave function collapser, you must install a tyrannical regime over what you permit before your eyes and ears today. Stop treating your attention as a cheap, infinite resource. Your attention is the precision laser with which you cut the diamond of reality. If you point it at trash, you will render trash. The process demands a visceral audit of your observation habits and the immediate induction of voluntary tactical blindness. Step 1. Eradication of superposition vocabulary. You must ruthlessly purge your language. Words are acoustic commands sending exact measurement coordinates. Combinations of words like hopefully or let us try are permanently forbidden. These words are pure quantum poison. They keep your reality trapped in a state of diffuse haze. An observer who hopes is an observer who has successfully measured nothing. From today, substitute probabilistic vocabulary for the deterministic verb. Speak strictly in the present tense. It is a fact. It is executed. Syntax is the first hammer blow. Step 2. Strict observation diet, or closing the terror loop. If you truly want to collapse abundance, you simply cannot afford to observe the scarcity of others. If you consume media news projecting global crises or interact with avatars constantly vomiting fear, you are heavily contaminating your instrument. The field does not judge if what you observe is supposedly yours. The field only registers the frequency of what you measure. If you measure the panic of a war on another continent through a digital screen, you forcefully collapse that energetic noise into your own three-dimensional perimeter. The architect executes a perceptual quarantine. He blocks low-frequency media and isolates his mind from the pack's terrified opinions. He protects his lens with a military-grade firewall, deeply understanding that looking at misery is directly inviting misery to re-render in his own backyard. Step 3. Tactical blindness to slow rendering, or three-dimensional ignorance. This is the final exam. When you fix your measurement on a massive historic goal, the physical world will try to break you. It will show you painful rejection or severe bank delays. The tactical order is unyielding. Apply blindness. I strictly forbid you from reacting emotionally to the hologram's temporary setbacks. Develop the empty, unreadable gaze of the quantum sociopath. Tell the three-dimensional screen, my code is securely in, the function has already collapsed, and no external force can make me doubt. By entirely denying your emotional reaction to negative reality, you withdraw the thermodynamic energy that keeps it alive. Without the observer's kinetic energy, the undesired reality rapidly dissolves, leaving open space for the empire you ordered to materialize without friction. To reclaim your throne, you must murder the spiritual beggar residing in your cortex today. Renounce the false, weak humility of believing your desires are mere requests to a higher power. The universe is not your master. The universe is your obedient mathematical slave. It is a massive machine of infinite states lying entirely dormant in the darkness of probability, waiting for an operator with enough thermal brutality to take command, fix the coordinates, and hit the enter key. The next time doubt tries to defocus your lens, the next time you feel the icy fear of committing to an absolute decision, stop your breath. Cut the mental fluctuation. Recognize the haze as the absolute enemy of solidification. Lift your measurement instrument with the crushing, inescapable gravity of a black hole. Focus exclusively on your consummated empire. Understand that the future is not a chronological place you travel to. The future is a quantum state you forcefully collapse toward the present. When you learn to look at your goals as rigorous scientific certainties already inhabiting your source code, you will permanently cease to be prey. You will have transmuted into the quantum architect, the supreme observation lens. For you, reality is never an unknown mystery to be discovered. It is, uniquely and exclusively, the three-dimensional masterpiece forced to surrender before the lethal and immovable weight of your own gaze. Chapter 3. Causal Entanglement. The Physics of Remote Domination. In the relentless and mind-bending architecture of the unified field, the human species has been enslaved by a geometric illusion so dense, so perfectly programmed into the simulation, that it has dictated the thermodynamic failure of 99% of the population. We shall call this supreme cognitive trap the illusion of locality, or the space-time stagnation. The ordinary individual, the biological entity we continuously audit under the strict clinical classification of the inert particle or the passive observer, has had his central nervous system completely formatted under the parameters of classical physics. He has been systematically convinced, through decades of sensory manipulation, that he is an isolated physical object, separated by miles, oceans, and chronological years from his supreme goals. Under the tyranny of this obsolete paradigm, the inert particle operates in a state of chronic, agonizing exhaustion. I want you to observe the exact X-ray of his mechanical wear and tear. The inert particle believes that his financial empire, his unshakable health, or the absolute loyalty of his corporate allies are located out there, at a measurable physical distance from his current coordinates. And because he operates entirely within the delusion of Newtonian physics, he believes that to move an object from point A to point B, he must apply a mechanical, physical force proportional to the mass of the object and the distance it must travel. Therefore, the slave initiates the analog chase. He engages in the humiliating and energetically disastrous practice of networking. He sends hundreds of desperate emails across the digital void, hoping to strike a target. He boards airplanes, crosses continents, and exhausts his finite biological battery, trying to physically place himself in the same room as the capital, the investor, or the opportunity. He believes that success requires friction. He believes that if he runs fast enough, if he pushes hard enough against the dense matter of the neon cavern, he will eventually close the spatial gap between his poverty and his ambition. He is fundamentally illiterate in the physics of quantum non-locality. The quantum architect observes this frantic, sweaty marathon with absolute glacial disgust. The sovereign recognizes that space is a holographic lie. Distance is a primitive optical illusion designed exclusively by the rendering engine to exhaust the weak, to filter out the unworthy, and to drain the kinetic energy of those who do not possess the intelligence to read the source code of reality. The master operator does not cross space. The master operator does not chase capital, and he absolutely never pursues a human being. To assume dictatorial control over the global grid without moving a single physical muscle, you must upgrade your operational software to the terrifying apex of advanced particle physics. You must master the phenomenon that Albert Einstein famously and fearfully referred to as spooky action at a distance. You must master the physics of causal entanglement. In the pure, unforgiving laboratories of quantum mechanics, physicists discovered a behavior in subatomic particles that completely shattered the foundation of classical reality. When two particles, let us call them particle A and particle B, interact with each other in a specific thermodynamic environment, their quantum states become permanently linked. They merge into a single, indivisible mathematical entity, regardless of the physical distance that subsequently separates them. This phenomenon is known as quantum entanglement. Once these particles are entangled, you can take particle A and leave it in a laboratory in New York, and you can take particle B and transport it to a laboratory on the dark side of the moon. They are separated by hundreds of thousands of miles of cold, empty vacuum. However, if a physicist in New York applies a magnetic field to particle A and forces it to spin in an up direction, the measuring instruments on the moon will instantly, without a single microsecond of delay, register that particle B has suddenly and violently flipped to spin in a down direction. There is no signal traveling between them. There is no radio wave crossing the void. A signal would take over a second to travel from the Earth to the Moon at the speed of light, but the reaction in entangled particles happens instantaneously. It breaks the speed of light. It breaks the concept of linear time. It proves with brutal mathematical finality that space is completely irrelevant to systems that share the same quantum state. To visualize this absolute terror of physics in plain text, we look at the Bell state equation for entangled particles. Fe. Do not let the notation distract you. Focus on the structural mandate of the equation. It dictates a law of complementary states. If particle A collapses into one state, particle B is thermodynamically forced by the inescapable laws of conservation to collapse into the exact opposite and complementary state. They are not two separate objects communicating. They are the exact same object, occupying two different coordinates in the hologram simultaneously. The inert particle looks at this physics and believes it only applies to microscopic electrons in sterile laboratories. The quantum architect looks at this physics and uses it to violently subjugate the macroscopic world. Here is the cosmological truth that will permanently eradicate your belief in distance. 14 billion years ago, at the exact moment of the Big Bang, all the matter, all the energy, all the capital, and all the biological entities that currently exist in the known universe were compressed into a single, infinitely dense point, a singularity. Everything was touching. Everything was unified. Therefore, according to the strict, uncompromising laws of quantum mechanics, every single atom in your physical body is already naturally entangled with every single atom of the wealth, the power, and the specific empire you are trying to build. You are not separated from the millions of dollars in the global market. You are not separated from the elite alliances you desire. You were born entangled with them. The illusion of separation only exists in the low-resolution front end of the 3D simulation. In the back end of the unified field, you and your target are the exact same quantum equation. Understanding this grants you a terrifying, almost sociopathic level of authority over your environment. If you are currently experiencing scarcity, rejection, or failure, it is not because the world is denying you. It is because your internal spin, your current energetic state, is actively forcing the world to behave that way. Let us apply the Bell state equation to your economic reality. You are particle A. The global market is particle B. If you walk into a negotiation, a sales pitch, or a market launch vibrating with the frequency of desperation, what are you doing? You are emitting a state of need. You are broadcasting the internal spin of a beggar who lacks capital. Because the market is quantumly entangled with you, it is mathematically forced to adopt the complementary state. If particle A adopts the spin of "I need money," particle B must instantly flip to the spin of "I will withhold money." If you project the spin of "I am chasing you," the target is thermodynamically required to adopt the spin of "I am running away." The inert particle spends his entire life in a state of frantic pursuit, completely oblivious to the fact that his own kinetic desperation is the exact magnetic force pushing his goals away at the exact same speed. He is trying to catch his own shadow by running toward it. The quantum architect annihilates the chase. The sovereign recognizes that remote domination does not require reaching out to the world. It strictly requires a violent internal reversal of your own subatomic spin. You retreat to the absolute silence of your anechoic chamber. You sever your sensory input from the physical distances of the world. You stop looking at the map. You stop tracking the miles, the time zones, and the obstacles separating you from your objective. You initiate the spin reversal protocol. If you require the market to surrender massive amounts of capital to your accounts, you do not go out and beg the market. You alter your internal state to absolute, suffocating saturation. You forge the physiological and psychological state of a tyrant whose vaults are already overflowing. You adopt the heavy, slow, and completely indifferent breathing of an entity that requires absolutely nothing from the outside world. You lock your internal geometry into the spin-up state of unbothered consumed ownership. The exact millisecond you manage to lock this state with zero internal fluctuation, the causal entanglement executes its mathematical mandate. Because you are perfectly entangled with your target, and because you have violently altered your state without breaking the wave function, particle B, the client across the ocean, the offshore capital, the impenetrable market, experiences a sudden, inexplicable quantum flip. They are forced to adopt the complementary state. If your state is now absolute satiation and indifference, the market must become absolute hunger and attraction. The people who were ignoring your emails suddenly feel a massive, irrational psychological pressure to contact you. The capital that was frozen in bureaucratic limbo suddenly unlocks and flows directly into your infrastructure. The adversaries who were planning to destroy your perimeter suddenly feel a heavy, inexplicable dread and decide to surrender their market share without a single shot being fired. They will believe they made these decisions of their own free will. They will justify their sudden attraction to your brand with logic and market analysis. They are completely blind to the terrifying reality that their minds were hacked, their spins were flipped, and their trajectories were altered strictly by the acoustic pressure of your internal stillness. This is the physics of true power. The architect does not move. He acts as the massive gravitational center of the equation, forcing the external universe to cover the physical distance to reach him. To execute this level of reality bending, you must install and ruthlessly enforce the protocols of remote domination. Step 1. The annihilation of the chase. From this exact cosmic microsecond, you are permanently forbidden from chasing anything in the three-dimensional plane. If a client hesitates, you do not send 5 follow-up emails begging for their attention. If a relationship threatens to pull away, you do not run after it. Chasing is the ultimate admission of a broken entanglement. When you chase, you tell the unified field that you are disconnected from the target. The moment you feel the analog instinct to pursue, you must freeze your biological vehicle, stop your hands, silence your mouth. Let the target drift into the void. Your refusal to chase is the highest voltage declaration of quantum sovereignty you can emit. Step 2. The imposition of the sovereign spin. When the external target creates distance, you use that distance as a trigger to increase your own density. You close your eyes and locate the invisible subatomic thread that connects your chest to the target. You do not pull on the thread. Pulling creates friction. You simply send a high-voltage pulse of pure, icy indifference down the line. You assume the state of the entity who has already replaced them, who has already won the battle, and who is profoundly bored by their hesitation. You hold this state of absolute, unyielding density. Step 3. The vacuum pull. By holding the sovereign spin, you create a massive energetic vacuum in the local matrix. The universe abhors a vacuum. The thermodynamic pressure builds rapidly around the target. Because they are entangled with you, your silence and your complete lack of need act as a gravitational anomaly. The pressure becomes unbearable for their nervous system. The target will find themselves thinking about you, obsessing over your offer, or feeling an extreme urgency to secure your approval. You have forced them to cross the physical distance, entirely under their own kinetic expenditure, simply to deliver the result directly to your feet. The 200 Hz biomass will look at your life, and they will be paralyzed by incomprehension. They will see you sitting in the stillness of your command center. They will see that you rarely travel to network, that you never raise your voice, and that you treat massive corporate negotiations with the sleepy detachment of a god watching insects. And yet they will see the absolute apex predators of the market traveling across the globe just to sit at your table. They will see capital flowing into your perimeter as if pulled by an invisible tractor beam. They will assume you have a secret logistical system. They will assume you possess hidden physical advantages. They will try to compete with you by moving faster, talking louder, and covering more geographical territory. They will exhaust themselves to death running on a three-dimensional treadmill. They will never understand that the master operator does not recognize the existence of the treadmill. To reclaim your throne at the center of the geometric web, you must murder the traveler and the laborer in your bloodline today. You must renounce the pathetic blue-collar pride of physical exhaustion. The universe does not reward the distance you traveled. It strictly rewards the density of the state you held. The next time you face the terrifying expanse of space, the next time you look at a continent, an ocean, or a massive corporate barrier separating you from your absolute victory. Do not brace yourself for a long journey. Do not calculate the miles. Stop your biological breathing. Sink into the absolute black zero point of your own consciousness. Recognize that in the deep subatomic reality, distance is a joke. You are already touching the gold. You are already inside the vault. You are already occupying the throne. Alter the spin, reverse the polarity, and watch, with the cold, unblinking eyes of an astrophysicist, as the entire physical world frantically rearranges its atoms to collapse at your feet. Chapter 4. Constructive Interference, Forging the Biological Laser. In the mathematically flawless, freezing, and absolutely impartial abyss of the unified field, failure is rarely the consequence of a coordinated external attack. The quantum universe is simply too vast, too thermodynamically efficient, and logistically neutral to waste its processing power conspiring against your ambitions. The absolute tragedy of the human condition, the true thermodynamic reason why sprawling empires collapse before they are even born, why massive fortunes evaporate into the ether, and why human wills break in the darkness, resides in a much darker internal design flaw. We shall classify this catastrophic error in signal emission as vibrational schizophrenia or split-frequency stagnation. Under the suffocating tyranny of this operative defect wanders in a state of perpetual kinetic frustration the ordinary individual, that predictable, exhausted entity we continually audit under the clinical taxonomy of the inert particle or the passive observer. Analyze the exact telemetry of his disaster with absolute coldness. The inert particle, after perhaps reading about the laws of physics applied to consciousness, or after experiencing a brief, analog spark of ambition, sits at the control board of his biology and attempts to issue a directional order to the quantum vacuum. With his conscious mind, which represents a pathetic microscopic percentage of his total computational processing capacity, he declares a goal of colossal proportions. He states, "I demand to build a multi-billion-dollar corporation," or "I demand the absolute, untouchable freedom of my entire lineage." Immediately following this declaration, the individual applies physical effort. He works 14 hours a day. He sweats. He designs complex logistical strategies. He exhausts his cellular structure. However, in the exact precise millisecond when the quantum mass is about to crystallize, just when the server is preparing to deliver the final rendering of his success, an invisible and devastating force completely annihilates the operation. The individual sabotages himself. He commits an absurd, irrational error. He instinctively rejects the crucial client, or he suddenly experiences a catastrophic drop in kinetic energy and abandons the project mere inches from the finish line. The inert particle, entirely blind to the architecture of reality, blames bad luck, unfavorable market conditions, or an unexpected external betrayal. The quantum architect knows better. The sovereign understands that luck is simply the poetic, pathetic name that the ignorant masses bestow upon the unforgiving physics of destructive interference. What has truly occurred within the interior wiring of that person is an act of absolute mathematical suicide. While his conscious mind was weakly transmitting the frequency of success and territorial expansion, his immense subconscious system, the deep, ancient roots of his neural network, programmed over decades by a civilization of slaves and deeply indoctrinated in the theology of scarcity, was absolutely terrified. The animal subconscious fears change. It fears the predatory envy of the herd. It fears the death of its current identity, and it is mortified by the suffocating weight of responsibility that absolute power demands. Therefore, in secret, the limbic system begins to aggressively broadcast a second electromagnetic wave, the heavy, dense, and chaotic wave of terror, doubt, and static survival. The individual is actively transmitting two entirely contradictory electromagnetic signals at the exact same time. He is a fractured system. He is a broken transmitter. To comprehend why this guarantees the inescapable ruin of physical matter, we must descend into the pure physics of optical and electromagnetic waves. We must assimilate the unforgiving law of destructive interference. In the quantum mechanics of wave propagation, when two or more signals travel through the exact same physical medium, their amplitudes mathematically add together. If your conscious mind emits a wave that represents your desire for domination, that wave travels with crests and troughs. If your subconscious simultaneously emits a wave of paralyzing terror, and that wave is exactly out of phase with your desire, meaning the crest of your ambition perfectly coincides with the trough of your fear, physics imposes an instantaneous death sentence. The two waves collide in the ether. The positive pressure is perfectly intercepted and annihilated by the negative pressure. The result of this collision is not a weaker wave. It is not a lesser version of your goal. The mathematical result is the total annihilation of the signal. The result is absolute quantum silence, a thermodynamic zero. In plain text format, devoid of any visual distraction, the governing equation of your failure reads as follows. Psi total and psi conscious, pounds, psi subconscious, and rise zero. Observe the brutality of the equation. You can exhaust your physical muscles until they collapse. You can run on the three-dimensional treadmill until you spit blood. But if your internal acoustic geometry is divided, your final transmission to the unified field is exactly zero. The server registers absolutely no command from you. The code fails to compile. Physical matter does not move a single centimeter in your favor, because at the subatomic level you have explicitly ordered the universe to remain completely still. The quantum architect observes this internal warfare, this analog grinding of the biomass, with a glacial repulsion. The sovereign recognizes that human willpower is a pathetic, useless metric if it is not backed by extreme geometric coherence. To assume dictatorial control over the hologram surrounding you, you must ruthlessly uproot the vibrational schizophrenia from your motherboard. You must purge the contradictions from your subconscious source code and transmute your biological vehicle into the most lethal optical emission instrument known to the cosmos. You must forge the biological laser through the unyielding physics of constructive interference. To assimilate this concept, analyze the abysmal thermodynamic difference between a traditional incandescent light bulb and an industrial-grade cutting laser. An ordinary light bulb, the perfect optical representative of the inert particle, emits millions of photons in a state of total chaos. These photons travel in every possible direction across the room, in hundreds of different frequencies, with completely uncoordinated phases. They crash into each other and rapidly dissipate their energy as residual heat. The bulb consumes a massive amount of electrical energy to produce its light, but that light is incredibly fragile. It dissipates after a few meters and is completely incapable of penetrating a simple piece of cardboard. The laser, on the contrary, does not operate under the laws of dissipation. The laser is the undisputed king of absolute quantum coherence. Inside the optical chamber of a laser, any form of dispersion is violently eradicated. Every single photon emitted is forced, through resonance mirrors, to vibrate at the exact, precise, same frequency. They all travel in the exact same vector direction, and, most critically of all, they are emitted perfectly in phase. The crests of the waves overlap exactly on top of the other crests. The troughs sink exactly into the other troughs. When billions of waves are perfectly aligned in phase, physics unleashes the miracle of constructive interference. Their amplitudes do not cancel or obstruct each other. They multiply exponentially and violently. They merge to form a single, massive, deafening beam of pure light. This light possesses a thermodynamic density so monstrous that it can slice through thick plates of steel as if they were water, effortlessly pierce industrial diamonds, and transmit terabytes of encrypted data across deep space without losing a single millimeter of its lethal architecture. The architect of the now is not a scattered light bulb wasting his energy to illuminate the walls for others. The architect is the primordial laser. To achieve this supreme state of absolute coherence, you must initiate the phase calibration of your neural network today. A laser cannot harbor imperfections within its chamber, and you cannot afford the luxury of harboring so-called limiting beliefs or past traumas. In the matrix of frequency engineering, your traumas are not poetic medals that make you wonderfully human. They are simply static noise. They are malicious code that distorts your optical emission and cancels your signal. You must descend into the tectonic plates of your subconscious with the relentless coldness of a cybernetic engineer. You must identify and neutralize the hidden resistance. Do you demand a corporate empire, but in your deepest layer you feel that extreme abundance will make you a target or corrupt your soul? Destroy that line of code immediately. Do you demand total dominance of your industry, but your animal biology is terrified by the freezing isolation that accompanies the absolute summit? Override that primitive fear with the immovable gravity of sovereign authority. Your primal survival instinct and your highest conscious vision must be irreversibly fused together. You must reconfigure your amygdala to understand that the true mortal danger does not reside in triumph. It resides in stagnation and mediocrity. When your subconscious feels absolute terror at the idea of failing to build the empire, and your conscious mind simultaneously designs the mathematical route to build it, the two massive waves finally align. Constructive interference detonates within your tissues. Your electromagnetic emission ceases to be a fragile human desire and transmutes into a quantum execution command. The hologram, bombarded by this laser of pure frequency, has no thermodynamic choice but to rewrite its atoms and part its seas to allow the dense weight of your intention to pass through. However, the mastery of this quantum optics does not end at the border of your skull. There exists a second vector of acoustic attack that threatens the integrity of your laser, a vector you must intercept and neutralize with extreme violence and apathy. External sabotage and the thermal leak of confidentiality. Even if you manage to forge a military-grade internal laser coherence, you are completely exposed to suffering destructive interference from the outside. This is the exact minefield where the biomass destroys its own miracles before they can even be born. The inert particle, momentarily thrilled by the vision of his new empire, commits the most stupid and heavily punished act of quantum treason in the ecosystem. He opens his mouth. He runs to find his herd members, his family, his stagnant colleagues, his supposed friends, and enthusiastically narrates the magnitude of his project. He shares a colossal, high-frequency objective with minds explicitly designed to operate in the mud of mediocrity. What happens in the invisible realm of electromagnetic waves in that exact instant? When you inform a low-frequency entity that you are going to alter the gravity of the industry, their biological measurement device reacts instinctively and immediately. Their brain, perceiving a threat to its own static comfort zone, emits a massive acoustic wave of doubt, disbelief, envy, and kinetic skepticism. That hostile radiation is an anti-phase wave. It exits their bodies and crashes directly against the fragile expanding wave of your embryonic creation. The skepticism of the biomass acts as a depth charge, an electromagnetic grenade detonated directly inside your vacuum chamber. It destructively interferes with your laser signal. It immediately reduces the amplitude of your certainty, cools your core temperature, and scatters the photons of your dictatorial focus. On the surface, you feel your motivation mysteriously drain away. You feel logistical excuses beginning to infiltrate your perimeter. It is not bad luck. You have willingly allowed hostile, unauthorized observers to contaminate the vacuum chamber of your creation experiment, forcing the wave function to collapse prematurely into a cloud of ash. The architect of the now prevents this cataclysm by installing the protocol of hermetic silence. The sovereign recognizes that vocal noise is the most primitive form of energy leakage. You have absolutely no moral, social, or tactical obligation to inform the minor satellites of the matrix about the imminent restructuring of the galaxy. The gestation of a material miracle in the three-dimensional plane demands the most severe, freezing, and sterile conditions known to physics. The architect seals his lips with lead. He exercises the total acoustic isolation of his objectives. He operates exclusively in the absolute vacuum of strategic confidentiality. He never demands that the world believe in his vision ahead of time. In fact, he does not even inform the world of his trajectory until the tower of his empire has physically pierced the atmosphere, forcing the biomass to swallow the undeniable, massive and heavy evidence of his victory. To execute hermetic silence with lethality, you must amputate your biological addiction to external validation. The urgent need to tell the herd about your plans does not stem from shared joy. It stems from a profound internal doubt. You want the pack to applaud your idea because deep down you are too weak to sustain the crushing weight of the vision alone in the dark. You are looking for a temporary thermal energy loan, but the architect never takes energy loans from inferior organisms. He feeds strictly and solely off the nuclear reaction occurring within his own sealed reactor. To reclaim the throne as the master operator of quantum transmissions, you must install and execute the laser fusion protocol this very day. Step 1. The subconscious code purge and the annihilation of conflict. You cannot emit a wave of pure power if your internal gears are paralyzed by guilt or the fear of success. Stop your kinetic movement. Conduct a ruthless audit of your real fears regarding unlimited power. Destroy the loser's narrative that heroic sacrifice or stagnant humility are metrics of nobility. Align your predatory animal instincts with the most advanced equations of your corporate strategy. Demand, through brutal discipline, that both the analytical machine and the limbic beast pull in the exact same vector direction. Zero friction, zero dissonance. Step 2. The anechoic chamber and ecosystem blindness. From this cosmic microsecond forward, the premature disclosure of any vital objective is strictly classified as high treason against your own standard of excellence. Silence is your Faraday shield. Until the quantum matter has fully crystallized in the bank vaults, in your physiology, or in the market structure, your project does not exist for the rest of the hologram. Bury the need to seek echoes in the neon cave. Fall in love with the cold, monastic, solitary, and absolutely mute labor. Step 3. The ignition of the continuous beam. Once your conscious and subconscious minds are perfectly superimposed in phase, and your acoustic perimeter is sealed against the destructive interference of mortals, you must flip the master switch. You generate the carrier wave. You do not turn it on one day and turn it off the next, as if you were the dying heartbeat of an indecisive particle. You weld the dial in the maximum power position. You keep the laser relentlessly aimed at the Eigen state of your consummated victory, without allowing a single nanometric deviation in your certainty. Thermodynamic nature abhors internal division and punishes static with the inescapable extinction of all your possibilities. The next time you feel dissonance cutting through the fabric of your focus, the next time your primal social instinct begs you to open your mouth to try and impress a useless hologram in the three-dimensional environment, stop the pulse of your breathing. Open the panel of your own consciousness and rip out the wiring of terror with your own hands. Bite the tongue of mediocrity until you taste the iron of your own will. Swallow the burning pressure of the creative fire. Do not share it, and seal your central nervous system with 10 meters of steel and isolation. Align the violence and aggressiveness of your survival instincts with the cold geometric precision of your conscious calculation. Fuse them under heat and pressure to form a single, hyperconducting circuit of zero resistance. When you learn to calibrate the acoustics of your neural network so that it operates as a single, massive and deafening wave of unbreakable power, you will cease to be a flickering light bulb begging not to be extinguished in the cave. You will stop dissipating your short, finite existence fighting against your own echoes. You will have transmuted by the irrefutable law of wave mechanics into the biological laser. You will have become the extreme high-voltage quantum anomaly whose unified silent vibration forces the mountains of destiny to step out of your trajectory, mathematically obliged to surrender before the dictatorial passage of your absolute light. Chapter 5. The Heisenberg Override, Tactical Surrender of the Trajectory. In the unfathomable, icy immensity of the unified field, the human mind harbors an evolutionary factory defect that constantly and violently sabotages its ability to operate on a cosmic scale. This biological flaw is not a lack of intelligence, nor is it a lack of ambition. It is a pathological, desperately anxious addiction to predictability. The ordinary individual, the entity we meticulously audit under the clinical taxonomy of the inert particle or the passive observer, has had his central nervous system formatted in the primitive conditions of the ancient savanna. In that brutal, analog environment, physical survival depended exclusively on linear predictability. The primitive brain needed to know exactly what predator was lurking behind each specific bush. It needed to calculate the exact linear trajectory of the spear to hunt for its next meal. Through thousands of years of biological inheritance, the human species has been heavily indoctrinated in the illusion of linear control. Under this suffocating cognitive tyranny operates the passive observer when he attempts to alter his modern reality. I want you to observe the exact radiography of his tactical suffocation. The inert particle, perhaps after experiencing a brief spark of quantum clarity, manages to collapse his wave function. He emits a massive high-voltage desire toward the quantum void. He declares his objective, a multi-million-dollar liquidity event, the absolute disruption of his industry, or the attainment of a sovereign, untouchable lifestyle. But immediately after making this declaration, he commits the most destructive act of thermodynamic heresy known to the simulation. He takes out a notebook, opens a spreadsheet, and demands to know, step by agonizing step, exactly how the universe is going to deliver that result. He demands a logistical map. He designs a rigid, unyielding master plan. He explicitly dictates to the universe the exact trajectory of his success. He stipulates that the capital must arrive through this specific client, during this exact fiscal quarter, utilizing this particular marketing strategy, and involving these specific corporate partners. He attempts to micromanage the infinite. He is fundamentally illiterate in the stochastic mathematics of the cosmic rendering engine. The quantum architect observes this desperate need for logistical control with a deep, glacial disgust. The sovereign recognizes that the biological human brain, no matter how highly educated, is a computationally pathetic machine compared to the infinite processing power of the unified field. When the inert particle demands that his success must travel through one specific linear path, he is taking the limitless, omnipotent computational fluid of the universe and attempting to force it through a microscopic, stupid human bottleneck. When the inevitable occurs, when the specific client says no, when the marketing strategy fails, or when the timeline is delayed, the analog ego of the slave panics. Because his rigid trajectory was broken, he immediately assumes that the destination itself has been lost. He releases a catastrophic wave of cortisol, abandons the Eigen state, and forcefully collapses his reality back into the baseline of absolute misery. He failed because he demanded to know the how. He failed because he violated the deepest, most non-negotiable law of quantum mechanics. To assume dictatorial control over the holographic matrix, you must permanently eradicate your addiction to linear planning. You must upgrade your logistical architecture by mastering the terrifying physics of Werner Heisenberg. You must execute the Heisenberg override. In the year 1927, the brilliant theoretical physicist Werner Heisenberg formulated a mathematical principle that completely shattered the deterministic arrogance of classical science. He discovered a fundamental limit to what can be known about the universe. It is called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. In the subatomic realm, every particle possesses two critical properties. its position and its momentum. Classical physics believed that with enough precision you could measure both perfectly. Heisenberg proved with flawless mathematics that the universe explicitly forbids this. In plain text, the foundational equation of the uncertainty principle is written like this: delta x delta p Zhanchong. Do not allow the algebra to intimidate your focus. Delta hx represents the uncertainty in the exact position of the particle. Delta p represents the uncertainty in its momentum or its trajectory. H is Planck's constant, a fundamental baseline of the universe. The equation dictates a terrifying and inescapable inverse relationship. The more precisely you try to measure the exact position of a particle, the less you can possibly know about its trajectory. Conversely, the more obsessively you try to control and measure the exact trajectory of the particle, the more completely uncertain and chaotic its final position becomes. You cannot have both. The universe demands a sacrifice of information. The 200 Hz biomass completely ignores this physics and thereby destroys its own destiny. When the inert particle obsesses over the how, when he tries to rigidly control the exact momentum, the exact timeline, and the exact logistical trajectory of his project, the uncertainty principle activates with brutal precision. By forcing absolute certainty upon the trajectory, the individual forces the final position to become infinitely uncertain. By demanding to know exactly how he will get there, he guarantees that he will never arrive at the destination. He loses the Eigen state. He loses the empire. The quantum architect, operating from the cold, bloodless peak of intellectual supremacy, perfectly understands the rules of the engine. He accepts the sacrifice. He executes the tactical surrender of the trajectory. The master operator knows that the only metric that possesses any absolute value in reality creation is the final coordinate, the what, the terminal Eigen state. Therefore, the architect uses his massive gravitational will to pin the exact position of his victory onto the fabric of space-time. He demands absolute certainty regarding the final destination. Because he has demanded absolute certainty regarding the position of his empire, the laws of quantum mechanics dictate that the trajectory, the how, must become a cloud of infinite, chaotic, and completely unpredictable probabilities. The architect accepts this chaos not with fear, but with a chilling, predatory smile. He understands that the how is none of his business. The logistical trajectory does not belong to the human brain. It belongs exclusively to the stochastic matrix of the unified field. The universe possesses infinite variables, infinite connections, and an unlimited capacity to calculate the path of least thermodynamic resistance. When you rigidly dictate the trajectory, you block the universe from delivering your success through a faster, more violent and more efficient route that your primitive brain could never have possibly imagined. If the architect needs a massive injection of offshore capital, he fixes the terminal coordinate in his mind. He feels the heavy, cold weight of the funds already deposited in his vault. He locks the measurement. Then he initiates kinetic action in the physical world, but he does so with absolute tactical blindness regarding the overall map. He makes a phone call, he launches a protocol, he moves a piece on the board, he takes the next immediate, logical step in his 5-meter radius, but he absolutely refuses to demand that this specific action must be the one to yield the millions. If the phone call is rejected, If the specific protocol fails, the architect does not experience a single micro-fluctuation in his internal temperature. He does not panic. He does not write poetry about failure. He simply recognizes that the server is recalculating. When a GPS navigation system encounters a closed road, the machine does not suffer an existential crisis. It does not doubt the existence of the destination. It simply emits a cold electronic notification, recalculating route. It instantly accesses the satellite grid, processes millions of alternative variables in a fraction of a second, and provides a new trajectory. The unified field is the supreme omnipotent GPS of your physical reality. When a business deal falls through, when a supposedly vital partner betrays you, or when a market door violently slams in your face, the universe is not punishing you. The universe is actively saving you from a highly entropic, inefficient, or ultimately destructive path. The field has detected a blockage in your primitive logistical plan, and because your final coordinate is locked with gravitational certainty, the field is forcefully routing you through a more efficient timeline. The inert particle cries over the closed door and abandons the journey. The quantum architect steps over the closed door completely unfazed and looks for the new vector that the universe has just opened. To navigate this level of reality manipulation, you must develop an ironclad tolerance for ambiguity. You must learn to exist comfortably in the dark. The path to supreme power is never a straight, brightly lit highway. It is a quantum leap through a dense, unpredictable fog. You will be demanded to execute actions that seem entirely illogical to the herd. You will be compelled to move capital, relocate your biological vehicle, or sever relationships based on an internal acoustic resonance that cannot be justified on a spreadsheet. If you demand a spreadsheet, you belong to the herd. If you demand a guarantee before you take the step, you are an employee of the matrix, not its administrator. To reclaim your throne and impose the Heisenberg override upon your nervous system, you must implement the protocols of stochastic surrender today. Step 1. The annihilation of the rigid map. You must conduct a violent audit of your current ambitions. Take the 5-year plans, the obsessive logistical flowcharts, and the rigid timelines that are currently causing your chest to tighten with anxiety, and mentally burn them to ash. Recognize that these plans are not tools of creation, they are instruments of limitation. They are your ego trying to play God with a calculator. You are allowed to have a directional vector. You are allowed to have daily operational protocols, but you are strictly forbidden from attaching your emotional stability to one specific trajectory. You must uncouple your peace from the how. Step 2. The execution of immediate kinetic ignition. Tactical surrender does not mean passive waiting. It is not an excuse for laziness. Surrender only applies to the macro trajectory. The micro execution requires extreme, continuous violence. Look at your hands. Look at your physical environment within a 5-meter radius. Ask your analytical machine, what is the single highest impact, most aggressive move I can execute in the next 2 hours? And then execute it. Send the prototype. Terminate the low-frequency contract. Make the cold call. Do not demand that this specific action makes you a billionaire tomorrow. Demand only that it breaks the thermodynamic inertia of the universe. The universe is a reactive computational engine. It cannot calculate a route for a parked vehicle. When you execute the next logical action with total tactical blindness, you step on the gas of your destiny. You force the server to render the next few meters of the fog. Step 3. The implementation of the mass tourniquet. When the universe responds, when an unexpected door opens, when a chaotic but lucrative variable presents itself, you must move with the terrifying speed of a striking predator. The inert particle hesitates because the opportunity does not look exactly like his original plan. The architect strikes instantly. You apply the mass tourniquet. You anchor the chaotic opportunity to the physical world before the quantum wave dissipates. You sign the document. You seize the asset. You extract the value from the chaos without demanding that it make linear sense. Perfection is an entropic myth designed to keep cowards poor. Geometric density is the only requirement. You must force the atoms of your reality to recognize a new, massive gravitational force on the board, and you do this by continuously moving forward through the fog, completely undisturbed by the changing terrain. To reclaim absolute command of the stochastic matrix, you must murder the neurotic micromanager residing in your frontal lobe today. You must renounce the false, pathetic arrogance of believing that your biological brain is superior to the mathematical engine that calculates the birth and death of massive stars in real time. Trust the server. The next time the ecosystem violently closes a door in your face, the next time the perfect plan completely collapses under the weight of unforeseen variables, and you feel the freezing desperation of having lost the map, stop the cortisol secretion immediately. Close your physical three-dimensional eyes. Smile in the exact center of the subatomic fog. Recognize chaos not as a threat, but as the raw computational fluid of the field. Understand that uncertainty is not the enemy of your empire. Uncertainty is the precise fundamental physics required to transport your empire from the realm of probability into the realm of solid mass. Release the mechanical reins of reality. Stop trying to steer the ocean. Fix your dictatorial sociopathic gaze strictly and exclusively upon the final throne of your omega coordinate. When you finally learn to move your pieces across the board without demanding logistical explanations from quantum physics, you will cease to be a stressed, exhausted traveler constantly fighting against the wind. You will have transmuted by the unappealable right of the Heisenberg override into the supreme architect. You are the sovereign entity for whom the path does not matter, because the entire mechanical universe is already breaking its own back, recalculating every single atom in the galaxy, just to ensure that the ground rises to meet your foot precisely where you decide to step. Chapter 6. Quantum Decoherence, Sealing the Reactor of the Will. In the immense, icy, and mathematically relentless architecture of the unified field, the gestation of a three-dimensional miracle demands the most extreme and sterile conditions known to the cosmos. When a massive idea has just been collapsed in the mind of the observer, that project, that incipient empire, exists in a state of extreme fragility. It is a quantum embryo. It is a delicate configuration of probability that has just begun to solidify into the first few atoms of physical reality. However, the vast majority of the human species suffers from a catastrophic design flaw in its communication motherboard. The biological inability to withstand the internal pressure of silence. We shall call this lethal pathology, which murders more destinies of greatness than any global economic crisis or military conflict, the stagnation of vocal hemorrhage. Under the suffocating tyranny of this defect operates the inert particle, or the passive observer. I want you to observe the exact radiography of his self-immolation. The inert particle experiences a brief spark of quantum clarity. He designs a brilliant business plan, decides to forge an elite physique, or conceptualizes a disruptive technological protocol. For a few seconds, his brain experiences a spike in kinetic energy. He feels the heat of the creative reactor. He is, for all intents and purposes, a nascent nuclear reactor. But then the analog ego, addictive and driven by the ancestral herbivore need to belong to the herd, commits the most stupid act of thermodynamic treason. He opens his mouth. The individual runs to find his peers, his family, or his mediocre colleagues to share his vision. He seeks the thermal caress of their approval. He wants them to tell him how brilliant he is before he has even moved a single physical gram of matter. In the precise moment he speaks his intention into the air of the neon cavern, he has violated the vacuum seal of his own creation. He is fundamentally illiterate in the physics of quantum decoherence. To assume dictatorial control over the rendering of reality, you must upgrade your operational security to the apex of particle physics. You must understand why the most powerful forces in the universe are inherently mute during their ignition phase. You must master the law of the isolated system. In the laboratories of quantum computing, engineers face a nightmare called decoherence. A quantum computer operates using qubits, which exist in a delicate state of superposition. To perform calculations that would take a classical computer millions of years, the qubits must remain perfectly coherent. They must be completely isolated from the outside world. If a single stray photon from the environment hits a qubit, or if there is a microscopic change in temperature, the quantum state is instantly destroyed. The superposition collapses into a boring, classical and useless state of 1 or 0. The miracle is cancelled by the noise. The external world is a massive source of thermal noise. Every opinion, every doubt, and every constructive criticism from a low-frequency individual acts as a stray photon hitting your quantum embryo. When you tell the herd about your plans, you are inviting billions of bits of environmental static into your laboratory. The passive observer believes that by sharing his goals, he is gaining support. The quantum architect knows that by sharing his goals, he is inducing decoherence. The moment the mediocre minds around you begin to process your idea through their own filters of fear, scarcity, and limited logic, they begin to measure your project. Their low-energy observations force your fragile wave function to collapse into their limited version of reality. You have allowed the herd to become the observers of your destiny, and since the herd can only perceive failure and difficulty, they anchor your project to the mud of the mundane. The nuclear fire of your will is rapidly dissipated as vocal heat, leaving you with a cold, dead reactor and a handful of empty promises. The master operator observes this vocal hemorrhage with absolute glacial disgust. The sovereign recognizes that the energy of the will is a finite thermodynamic resource. In physics, the first law of thermodynamics dictates that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. When you possess a massive vision, you have a high-pressure reservoir of potential energy. You have two choices. You can use that pressure to drive the mechanical pistons of physical execution, building the company, coding the software, or training the body, or you can release the valve and let the pressure escape through your throat in the form of torque. You cannot do both. Every time you brag about what you are going to do, you experience a small synthetic dopamine release. Your brain is tricked into believing the task is already finished. The pressure in the reactor drops. The internal hunger that was supposed to fuel the months of grueling labor is dissipated in a single evening of social validation. You have traded your future empire for a few seconds of cheap applause from people you don't even respect. To assume the throne of the Singularity, you must execute the protocol of the information black hole. In astrophysics, a black hole is an entity of such immense density and gravity that not even light can escape its event horizon. It is a region of absolute silence and absolute capture. The black hole does not broadcast its intentions to the galaxy. It does not seek approval from the stars. It simply sits in the center of the void, silently and relentlessly accumulating mass, until its gravity is so powerful that the entire galaxy is forced to rotate around it. The quantum architect is a psychological black hole. He incubates his projects in the coldest, most silent trenches of his own consciousness. He builds his assets behind a military-grade firewall of confidentiality. He understands that the now is the only coordinate where the energy must be concentrated. If he is building a financial fortress, he does not post about it on the digital grids of the masses. He does not seek likes for his blueprints. He allows the pressure of the unsaid to build up within his tissues until it becomes a combustible force. He uses that compressed silence as the propellant for his kinetic actions. When the 200 Hz biomass interacts with the architect, they perceive a mysterious and terrifying void. They see a man who acts with lethal precision but offers no explanations. They see a system that is expanding at exponential speeds but has no visible marketing desperation. The architect's silence acts as a vacuum that pulls in resources, capital, and talent. Because he does not leak information, the environment cannot find a way to interfere with his signal. He has achieved the state of absolute coherence. To reclaim your sovereignty and seal your reactor against the thermal decay of the herd, you must implement the protocols of hermetic execution today. Step 1. The amputation of the approval addict. You must conduct a ruthless audit of your social interactions. Identify the vocal leak, that specific moment when you feel the desperate, itchy urge to tell someone about your latest success or your future plans just to see the look of admiration in their eyes. You must recognize that urge for what it is, a biological parasite attempting to drain your power. From this microsecond forward, you are strictly forbidden from discussing your process with anyone who is not directly involved in the mechanical execution of the task. Step 2. The sterilization of the vacuum chamber. If you are building an elite business or a superior biology, you must operate in a state of perceptual quarantine. Do not seek advice from those who have not already achieved the Eigen state you are targeting. Their advice is merely the projection of their own decoherence. Their doubts are infections. Seal your perimeter. Keep your blueprints in encrypted files and your goals in the dark. The less the world knows about what you're doing, the less the world can do to stop you. Step 3. The roar of the finished render. You do not talk until the matter has fully crystallized. You do not explain your vision. You present the evidence. You do not speak of the training, you reveal the physique. You do not pitch the idea, you launch the monopoly. By the time the world realizes you were even working on a project, the wave function has already collapsed into a dense, heavy, and irreversible three-dimensional fact. You force the herd to observe your victory as a finished, unchangeable monument. When you present a finished empire, the herd's doubt is irrelevant. The decoherence can no longer happen because the system is no longer in superposition. You have moved from the fragility of the maybe to the invincibility of the is. The 200 Hz biomass will look at your sudden, massive manifestations, and they will call you an overnight success. They will assume you were lucky or that you found a shortcut. They will never know about the months or years you spent in the freezing silence of your own internal laboratory. They will never know about the excruciating pressure you contained within your own ribcage while you refused to speak. They will try to lure you into their noise. They will ask you for your secrets. They will invite you to speak at their meaningless events. You must remain the Sphinx. To reclaim your throne at the center of the quantum grid, you must murder the boastful child and the approval-seeking slave residing in your prefrontal cortex today. You must renounce the false nobility of transparency. Transparency is for the weak. It is for those who have nothing to hide because they are building nothing of value. The architect is opaque. The architect is a lead vault. The next time you feel the heat of a new idea rising in your throat, the next time you achieve a minor victory and feel the urge to broadcast it to the holographic avatars of your social circle, stop the impulse. Clamp your jaws shut until your teeth ache. Swallow the fire. Let it burn your insides. Let the pressure build until you feel like you might explode, and then take that explosive energy and channel it directly into the next mechanical line of code, the next heavy lift, or the next cold-blooded capital allocation. When you learn to operate as an information black hole, when you manage to incubate the cataclysm of your own success in the coldest, most silent trench of your consciousness, you will cease to be a loudspeaker of meaningless noise. You will have transmuted, by the unappealable right of quantum coherence, into the supreme architect. You are the singularity in the shadows, the entity for whom the world is completely blind, until the moment your empire is so heavy and so undeniably solid that its very existence forces the entire universe to fall into a permanent, obedient silence. Chapter 7. Syntropic Aggression. Reversing the arrow of thermodynamic decay. In the immense, chilling, and mathematically ruthless darkness of the unified field, there exists a silent, odorless, and invisible executioner. It is a force that devours global empires, annihilates peak biological health, and pulverizes massive fortunes with a slowness so sadistic that the human mind rarely detects the execution until the victim is already reduced to dust. We shall call this supreme cosmic predator entropy. The ordinary individual, the biological entity we audit under the clinical classification of the inert particle or the passive observer, has been heavily inoculated with the most infantile and destructive fantasy of classical physics, the belief in permanence. From the earliest stages of his assembly, the slave is taught that success, once achieved, possesses an intrinsic capacity to maintain itself. He believes that if he builds a profitable business, forges an aesthetically superior body, or secures a high-value relationship, he has arrived. He believes he can finally plant his flag, recline on his throne of sand, and stop the output of kinetic energy. He is fundamentally illiterate in the strict, unyielding laws of thermodynamics. The quantum architect observes the concept of maintenance with a deep, glacial disgust. The sovereign recognizes that in a universe governed by the second law of thermodynamics, there is no such thing as standing still. There is only growth, or there is rot. There is only the violent injection of order, or there is the inevitable descent into the cold, grey mush of chaos. To assume dictatorial control over your reality, you must upgrade your operational software to the apex of systemic engineering. You must master the physics of syntropic aggression. To comprehend the absolute necessity of this aggression, we must analyze the mathematical mandate of the second law of thermodynamics. In the late 19th century, physics codified the ultimate death sentence for all closed systems. The law states that the total entropy of an isolated system can never decrease over time. It can only remain constant or increase. In formal latex, the law of your inevitable destruction is written as $. In this equation, $, represents entropy, the measure of disorder, randomness, and unavailable energy within a system. The law dictates that every single structure in the universe, from the spinning galaxies to the offshore bank accounts of the elite, is naturally and spontaneously trending toward a state of maximum disorder. Energy is constantly leaking. Information is constantly being corrupted. Order is constantly being shredded by the background radiation of the cosmos. This is the arrow of time, and the arrow points straight toward your annihilation. I want you to observe the exact radiography of the passive observer's operational rot. The inert particle manages through a brief and rare collapse of the wave function to achieve a state of high-order success. He builds his company, he secures his capital, but the moment the goal is reached, his primitive brain, designed for extreme energy conservation, emits a signal of thermal relaxation. The individual sighs. He stops the aggressive protocols that built the empire. He begins to enjoy his success. He becomes a tourist in his own kingdom. In that precise second of relaxation, the second law of thermodynamics identifies a target. Without the continuous, violent injection of new energy, the system begins to experience heat death. The employees become lazy and entitled. The marketing signal becomes diluted and weak. The biological tissues begin to lose their density. The capital begins to leak through microscopic, unnoticed inefficiencies. Because the inert particle is blinded by the illusion of permanence, he ignores these small increases in entropy. He calls them minor setbacks, or the cost of doing business. He believes the structure is solid, but underneath the surface, the disorder is compounding exponentially. By the time the individual realizes the building is on fire, the structural integrity has already been compromised beyond repair. The wave function has permanently decohered. The empire collapses into the grey dust of the baseline, leaving the slave wondering what went wrong. What went wrong was a violation of the thermodynamic mandate. The quantum architect does not believe in maintaining anything. The architect understands that to keep a system at the same level of order, you must actually exert more energy than was required to build it in the first place. This is because you are not just building, you are actively fighting against the relentless, corrosive wind of the entire universe. To survive the second law, you must implement the physics of syntropy. Syntropy, also known as negentropy or negative entropy, is the measure of order, organization, and concentrated energy. While the rest of the universe is screaming toward chaos, the sovereign creates a vortex of negentropy. He becomes a localized anomaly that reverses the arrow of time within his own perimeter. But syntropy is not a passive state. Order is not a polite request. In a universe of chaos, order is an act of war. To execute the syntropic mandate, you must adopt the protocol of the demon of Maxwell. In 1867, the physicist James Clerk Maxwell proposed a thought experiment to challenge the second law. He imagined a sealed container divided into two chambers filled with gas molecules at a uniform temperature. Between the chambers is a small door guarded by a hyper-intelligent entity, the demon. The demon does not move the molecules himself. He simply observes. When he sees a fast-moving, high-energy molecule approaching the door from the left, he opens it and lets it pass to the right. When he sees a slow-moving, low-energy molecule approaching from the right, he lets it pass to the left. Through this simple, relentless act of intelligent selection, the demon separates the energy. He creates a temperature difference. He creates order out of chaos. He reverses entropy without performing work in the classical sense. He does it through the power of information and selection. The quantum architect is the demon of his own empire. He understands that a system rots because it allows the slow molecules to remain inside. He looks at his corporate structure, his social circle, and his biological habits with the cold, unblinking eyes of a predator. He identifies the low-energy elements, the mediocre employees, the lukewarm alliances, the parasitic habits, and he violently ejects them from his chamber. He does not do this out of cruelty. He does it out of thermodynamic necessity. To the passive observer, the architect's behavior seems aggressive or ruthless. The slave believes in inclusion and giving people chances. Inclusion is the mathematical path to maximum entropy. Inclusion is how you turn a high-voltage reactor into a tepid pool of grey mud. The architect knows that if he allows even 1% of disorder to remain within his system, that disorder will act as a catalyst for the total decay of the structure. Therefore, he practices syntropic aggression. He injects new high-voltage energy into his system every single day. He forces his company to innovate when it is already profitable. He forces his body to train when it is already elite. He forces his mind to learn when he is already the master. He does not do this to get somewhere. He does it because he knows that if he stops the injection of order for even 1 microsecond, the executioner will begin its work. To reclaim your throne and become the anti-decay engine of your own reality, you must implement the protocols of syntropic aggression today. Step 1. The audit of decay or the entropy hunt. You must conduct a clinical, emotionless inspection of your current perimeter. Look for the dust accumulating in the corners of your life. Identify the relationships that have become lukewarm and habitual. Identify the business processes that are good enough. Identify the physical areas where you have allowed comfort to soften your edge. Every area where you have accepted stability is an area currently being eaten by entropy. You must map these points of decay with the precision of a surgeon identifying a tumor. Step 2. The act of radical pruning. Once the points of decay are identified, you must execute the demon's protocol. You must violently remove the low-energy molecules from your system. Terminate the employee who has plateaued. Cut off the friend who brings nothing but static and complaints. Delete the habits that consume your time without returning a massive yield of power. You must create a vacuum of order. This process will be painful to your analog ego, which craves the familiarity of the old decay. You must override the ego and prioritize the thermodynamics of the empire. Step 3. The injection of high-voltage negentropy. You cannot leave the system empty. Once you have pruned the rot, you must immediately fill the space with superior energy. You must set a new, impossible standard for your team. You must introduce a new, disruptive technology into your workflow. You must subject your biological vehicle to a new level of physical stress. You must over-order the system. By injecting more order than is strictly necessary for survival, you create a buffer against the future wind of entropy. You create a system that is not just stable, but anti-fragile. A system that actually grows stronger through the friction of the world. The 200 Hz biomass will look at your life and they will call you obsessive. They will call you a workaholic or a maniac. They will ask you why you can't just relax and enjoy what you have. You must recognize these questions as the voice of entropy itself. The herd wants you to relax because your high-order presence makes them feel the weight of their own decay. They want you to descend to their temperature. They want you to experience heat death alongside them. You must remain a localized anomaly. To reclaim your throne at the center of the quantum grid, you must murder the tourist and the retiree residing in your prefrontal cortex today. You must renounce the false, toxic dream of passive income and passive success. Nothing in this universe is passive except for death. Sovereignty is an active, continuous, and violent expenditure of will. The next time you feel the seductive heat of complacency rising in your blood, the next time you look at your achievements and feel the urge to take a break and let the system run itself, stop the signal immediately. Open your eyes and look at the invisible executioner standing in the corner of the room. Recognize that every second of your relaxation is a second of his victory. Feel the cold, relentless pressure of the second law of thermodynamics pushing against your walls. And then, turn toward the console of your own life and push every single fader to the maximum. Inject the fire, demand the impossible, purge the mediocre. When you learn to love the war against decay, when you manage to transform your entire existence into a self-sustaining vortex of absolute aggressive order, you will cease to be a fragile construction destined to fade away. You will have transmuted by the unappealable right of syntropy into the quantum architect. You are the radiant singularity for whom time does not mean decay, but refinement. You are the entity that uses the very chaos of the universe as the sterile fuel to forge a kingdom that never cools, never slows, and never bows before the arrow of time. Keep the reactor hot, protect the order, reverse the arrow. Chapter 8. The Holographic Fractal, Dictating the Two-Dimensional Boundary. The idolatry of scale is the most paralyzing and mathematically illiterate hallucination currently hard-coded into the biological operating system of the human species. Observe the 200 Hz inertial slave as he navigates the complex, overwhelming topography of the neon cavern. From the earliest stages of his cognitive assembly, he has been aggressively indoctrinated to believe in the absolute authority of size. He has been taught to measure reality using a linear Newtonian ruler. He looks at a massive corporate debt, a global market saturated by multi-billion-dollar titans, or the immense chronological abyss separating him from his financial empire, and he feels a catastrophic drop in his internal voltage. He compares the microscopic volume of his biological body with the monstrous dimensions of the three-dimensional barriers before him. Under the tyranny of this spatial blindness, the individual's nervous system suffers a thermal collapse. He feels small. He feels insignificant. He concludes that to solve a big problem he requires a big amount of resources, a big team, or a big miracle. He is fundamentally illiterate in the strict, unyielding physics of the holographic principle and the self-similarity of fractal geometry. The quantum architect observes this obsession with volume with absolute glacial disgust. The sovereign recognizes that size is a holographic illusion designed by the rendering engine to filter out those who cannot see the underlying source code. In a universe governed by information theory, there is no difference between the microscopic and the macroscopic. There is only the density of the information and the integrity of the boundary. To assume dictatorial control over the global hologram, you must upgrade your perception to the apex of theoretical physics. You must master the art of editing the two-dimensional boundary to dictate the three-dimensional volume. To comprehend this level of reality manipulation, we must descend into the most profound discovery of black hole thermodynamics, the holographic principle. In the late 20th century, physicists like Gerard 't Hooft and Leonard Susskind faced a terrifying paradox regarding what happens to information when it falls into a black hole. According to classical logic, if you throw a library into a black hole, the information is lost as the volume is crushed into a singularity. However, quantum mechanics dictates that information can never be destroyed. The resolution to this paradox shattered our understanding of space-time. Physicists discovered that the total information content of a three-dimensional region of space is not contained within its volume, but is instead perfectly encoded on its two-dimensional surface area, or its boundary. Mathematically, the entropy, or the information capacity of a region, is defined by the Bekenstein-Hawking formula. In plain text, it reads, information, entropy, summation surface area. In this equation, the Planck area is the smallest possible unit of space. This formula proves a staggering truth. The depth of a room, a city, or a global economy is merely a projection. The real data, the raw execution code of reality, resides strictly on the boundary. Just as a two-dimensional credit card contains a holographic image that appears three-dimensional when hit by light, the entire universe is a holographic projection of information encoded on a distant, two-dimensional surface. The inert particle attempts to change his life by fighting the 3D projection. He tries to move mountains. He tries to physically rearrange the massive objects in his environment. This is as futile as trying to change the image on a cinema screen by physically grabbing the light in the air. You can struggle for a lifetime. You can exhaust your kinetic energy, but the image will remain unchanged because you are not touching the source. The quantum architect does not touch the projection. The architect edits the boundary. He understands that his immediate, localized environment, his daily routine, the precision of his speech, the order of his physical space, and the frequency of his internal monologue is the two-dimensional boundary of his entire destiny. He recognizes the fractal nature of the matrix. A fractal is a geometric object that is self-similar across all scales. Whether you look at a fractal at a magnification of 1 or 1 billion, the pattern remains identical. The coastlines of continents, the branching of human lungs, and the fluctuations of the stock market all obey this recursive law. In a fractal universe, the how you do the small thing is the how you do the large thing. The way you organize a single square centimeter of your desk is the exact holographic blueprint for how you organize a multinational corporation. The way you handle a $100 transaction is the precise fractal seed of how you handle a $100 million acquisition. If there is a bug in the code at the microscopic level, a small act of laziness, a minor lie, a microsecond of hesitation, that bug is not confined to the small scale. The holographic engine takes that microscopic error and projects it across the entire three-dimensional volume of your life. This is why the passive observer fails. He believes that he can be messy and undisciplined in his private life while simultaneously being a titan in the boardroom. He believes he can wait until he is rich to start acting with precision. He does not understand that the rich version of himself is a 3D projection that cannot exist until the 2D boundary of his current microactions is perfectly encoded with the frequency of wealth. To assume the throne, you must execute the protocol of the fractal singularity. You must become a tyrant of the immediate. You must realize that there are no small moments. Every microsecond is an opportunity to re-encode the boundary. Every single thought you permit to pass through your awareness is a data entry into the holographic source code. When the architect wishes to collapse a massive objective like a total market monopoly, he does not look at the bigness of the market. He knows that the market is a fractal projection of his own internal coherence. Instead of being intimidated by the mountain, he focuses his entire lethal intensity on the square centimeter of reality he currently occupies. He demands absolute machine-like perfection in the present coordinate. He speaks with a precision that brooks no ambiguity. He moves with a grace that implies total ownership of space. He organizes his immediate data with the cold rigor of a supercomputer. By imposing a state of absolute order on the local boundary, he forces the holographic rendering engine to respond. Because the universe is a fractal, the engine cannot maintain a state of order at the center while allowing chaos at the perimeter. The law of self-similarity demands that the pattern must match. As the architect sustains the high-voltage order of his immediate square centimeter, the 3D hologram begins to violently rearrange itself to match the new code. The mountain of debt begins to shrink because the architect has mastered the grain of sand of his personal finances. The titans of the industry begin to yield because the architect has mastered the internal board of directors of his own psyche. The scale of the victory is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the purity of the fractal seed. To reclaim your sovereignty and weaponize the holographic principle, you must implement the protocols of micro-precision today. Step 1. The annihilation of the scale illusion. You must conduct a ruthless audit of your perception. Identify the big problems that are currently causing your nervous system to leak energy through fear. Recognize them for what they are. Low-resolution holographic projections. Stop looking at the volume. Stop looking at the millions you don't have, or the years it will take. From this microsecond forward, you are strictly forbidden from being intimidated by size. You must collapse your entire field of vision until it encompasses only the current task, the current hour, and the current square centimeter. Step 2. The dictatorship of the pixel. If you want to change the picture, you must change the pixel. Look at the most mundane aspect of your daily operation. Is your physical environment chaotic? Is your digital filing system a mess? Are your daily habits dictated by impulse rather than command? These are the corrupted pixels in your source code. You must apply a level of discipline to these small areas that would seem insane to the 200 Hz biomass. You must treat a messy desk with the same tactical gravity as a failing supply chain. Clean the pixel, order the pixel, dominate the pixel. When the local data is clean, the global projection will follow. Step 3. The recursive execution. Once you have established order in your immediate coordinate, you must maintain it with the relentless continuity of a machine. You do not do the small things well once. You do them with a recursive, obsessive frequency. You become a fractal of excellence. As you hold this state of micro-precision, you will notice a strange phenomenon. The big opportunities will begin to manifest without you chasing them. The massive obstacles will begin to dissolve. This is not magic. It is the holographic engine updating the 3D volume to match the high-density information you have encoded on the 2D boundary. The 200 Hz biomass will look at your life and they will be baffled by your luck. They will see you spending 20 minutes perfecting a single email or organizing a single shelf, and they will laugh. They will call you meticulous or OCD. They will tell you that you are missing the big picture. You must recognize that they are the ones who are blind. They are trying to paint a masterpiece by throwing buckets of paint at a screen while you are editing the binary code of the universe, one bit at a time. You are the only one who truly understands the big picture, because you are the only one who knows that the big picture is composed entirely of millions of tiny, perfect fractals. To reclaim your throne at the center of the quantum grid, you must murder the big picture dreamer and the sloppy visionary residing in your prefrontal cortex today. Renounce the false, lazy arrogance of believing that you are too big for small tasks. No one is too big for the fractal. The universe is a hierarchy of information, and the most powerful nodes are those that possess the highest density of order at the smallest scale. The next time you feel overwhelmed by the immensity of your goals, the next time the holographic simulation projects a giant obstacle on your path that threatens to extinguish your internal flame, stop your biological breathing. Freeze the frame. Lower your gaze from the horizon and look at the single square centimeter of reality directly in front of your face. Identify the one thing you can order, the one bit of data you can clean, the one micro-action you can execute with absolute godlike perfection right now. Do not look up until that square centimeter is a monument to your sovereign will. When you learn to edit reality at the nanometric scale of your own discipline, when you realize that the entire multi-billion-dollar matrix is nothing more than a recursive echo of your current moment of focus, you will cease to be a soldier fighting in the wars of the projection. You will have transmuted, by the unappealable right of the holographic principle, into the fractal singularity. You are the architect of the source code for whom space-time is a playground. You do not need to move mountains, for the entire universe is already vibrating in anticipation, ready to rearrange its galaxies to match the flawless pattern you have just encoded into the silence of your own immediate presence. Master the pixel, command the boundary, rule the hologram. Chapter 9. Zero-point extraction, harvesting capital from the vacuum. In the holographic simulation we currently inhabit, the most efficient and devastating control algorithm ever designed to maintain the biological biomass in a state of perpetual, exhausted slavery is the mathematical lie of scarcity. Observe the 200 Hz inertial slave as he navigates the economic topography of the neon cavern. From the earliest stages of his embryonic assembly and cognitive formatting, this individual, whom we audit under the clinical taxonomy of the inert particle or the passive observer, has been heavily indoctrinated in a flawed thermodynamic premise. He has been systematically taught to believe that wealth, creative ideas, and sovereign success are finite, physical resources. He believes in the theology of the closed pie. Under the tyranny of this paradigm, the passive observer operates in a state of chronic, agonizing, competitive friction. I want you to observe the exact radiography of his economic despair. The inert particle looks at the global market and sees a limited volume of capital, a fixed number of clients, and a saturated field of competitors. His primitive brain, atrophied by the illusion of Newtonian mechanics, concludes that for him to win $1, another organism must lose it. He believes that to secure a slice of the pie, he must violently snatch it from the jaws of another particle. He lowers his prices. He works double hours. He engages in the humiliating practice of hustling, which is nothing more than the desperate expenditure of finite biological ATP to fight over crumbs. He is fundamentally illiterate in the strict, unyielding physics of the quantum vacuum. The quantum architect observes this three-dimensional cannibalism with a deep, glacial disgust. The sovereign recognizes that scarcity is a perceptive virus designed to keep the herd distracted and weak. He understands that the universe is not a closed, depleting system. It is an infinite, self-renewing computational engine. To assume dictatorial control over your financial destiny, you must upgrade your operational software to the apex of field theory. You must master the art of zero-point extraction. To comprehend the absolute omnipotence of this protocol, we must descend into the most terrifying and beautiful discovery of modern physics, the truth about nothingness. In the classical common-sense world of the passive observer, a vacuum is simply an empty space. If you take a lead box and remove every single atom of matter, every photon of light, and every trace of heat until you reach absolute zero, the slave believes that what remains inside that box is zero. He believes it is truly empty. Quantum mechanics proves that nothing is the most energetic thing in existence. According to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, it is mathematically impossible for any field to have an exact value of zero at any specific point in space-time. There must always be a residual, vibrating fluctuation. Even in a perfect vacuum, at the lowest possible energy state, the space is boiling with virtual particles. These are particles that pop in and out of existence in pairs, matter and antimatter, borrowing energy from the vacuum for a fraction of a millisecond and then annihilating each other. This invisible, infinite ocean of background radiation is known as zero-point energy. Physicists have calculated the energy density of this vacuum. The numbers are so monstrous that they melt the human imagination. a single cubic centimeter of empty space contains enough latent energy to boil all the oceans on planet Earth in an instant. The universe is not a desert of scarcity. It is a pressurized high-voltage reactor where every millimeter of space is packed with an infinite amount of untapped power. The quantum architect does not fight for a piece of the pie. The architect builds his own oven and precipitates his own pie directly from the vacuum of the field. To move from the competitive agony of the slave to the creative sovereignty of the master operator, you must master the mechanics of extraction. You must understand how to force the vacuum to yield solid, three-dimensional mass. You must master the Casimir effect. In 1948, the Dutch physicist Hendrik Casimir proposed a thought experiment to prove the existence of zero-point energy. He imagined two uncharged, perfectly flat metallic plates placed extremely close together in a vacuum, separated only by a few nanometers. According to classical logic, nothing should happen. There is no gravity between them, no electrical charge, and no air. The plates should remain motionless. But Casimir's mathematics predicted a different result. In the empty space between the plates, the quantum fluctuations, the virtual particles, are restricted. Because the space is so narrow, only waves of certain frequencies can exist between them. However, on the outside of the plates, the entire infinite spectrum of vacuum fluctuations exists without restriction. This creates a massive imbalance of information. The infinite pressure of the vacuum on the outside of the plates is greater than the restricted pressure on the inside. This results in a physical, measurable force that violently pushes the two plates together. The nothingness of the outside world performs physical work on the plates. Casimir proved that you can extract a physical, mechanical force from the absolute void simply by creating a specific geometric constraint. The quantum architect applies this astrophysical law to the generation of wealth and power. He recognizes that to extract capital from the vacuum, he must create economic Casimir plates. He must establish a localized area of extreme constraint and high-density focus within his own operation. The inert particle fails to extract anything from the void because his life is a scattered, low-pressure mess. He has no plates. He has no constraints. He tries to do everything for everyone. He broadcasts his energy in all directions at a low voltage. His mind is a wide-open field where any stray thought or environmental distraction can wander in. Because he has no internal geometric pressure, the vacuum remains dormant. He is forced to work for his money because he cannot make the field work for him. The architect, however, creates a state of hyperfocus. He identifies a single disruptive idea, a high-voltage solution that the market does not even know it needs. He then places this idea between the plates of absolute silence and relentless execution. He cuts off all outside noise. He eliminates all secondary projects. He restricts his entire biological and computational existence to the narrow nanometer of this specific objective. By creating this extreme internal constraint, the architect creates a vacuum imbalance. Because his internal focus is so restricted and so dense, it creates a massive pressure differential with the infinite potential of the external unified field. The universe, which abhors an imbalance, is mathematically forced to respond. The infinite energy of the vacuum begins to push against the architect's plates. Virtual particles, in the form of sudden synchronicities, billion-dollar ideas, and unexpected capital injections, begin to pop out of the void and into his physical reality. He does not have to chase the client. He does not have to fight the competitor. He has created a geometric trap that forces the abundance of the field to precipitate exactly where he has placed his plates. This is the physics of ex nihilo creation. It is the birth of the monopoly. When you extract capital from the zero-point field, you are not taking from others. You are bringing entirely new value into the world that did not exist before your act of observation. You are a source of emission, not a consumer of resources. You are the architect of a new industry, a new category, and a new paradigm of power. The 200 Hz biomass will look at your sudden, massive rise, and they will be paralyzed by their own lack of understanding. They will call you a disruptor. They will say you were at the right place at the right time. They will never comprehend that you did not find the place. You manufactured the spatial coordinates using the sheer thermodynamic pressure of your own restricted focus. To reclaim your sovereignty and become a vacuum extractor of reality, you must implement the protocols of zero-point harvesting today. Step 1. The identification of the scarcity virus. You must conduct a ruthless audit of your economic vocabulary and your biological reactions to the concept of money. Every time you feel a sting of envy for another's success, every time you worry about a competitor taking your market share, every time you feel the panic of a limited pie, you must recognize it as a malfunction of your code. You are operating in 3D Newtonian mode. You are looking at the visible atoms and ignoring the infinite ocean of energy in the background. Stop the reaction. Remind your nervous system that you are an administrator of the field, and that there is more capital in the cubic centimeter of your current thought than in all the banks of the planet. Step 2. The construction of the Casimir plates. You must choose one single objective, not 3, not 5, 1. This is your primary plate. The second plate is your absolute commitment to silence. You must place your objective between these two plates and narrow the distance until there is no room for anything else, no hobbies, no distractions, no social validation, no plan B. You must create such a narrow, pressurized internal space that the outside world perceives you as obsessive or socially dead. This extreme restriction is the only way to create the pressure differential required to trigger the vacuum response. Step 3. The harvesting of the virtual assets. Once the plates are set, you must maintain the vacuum. You sit in the silence and you perform the mechanical work within the plates with a cold, robotic precision. You do not look for the results. You do not hope the money comes. You simply sustain the high-pressure focus. Suddenly the field will respond. A virtual opportunity will materialize. A connection, a piece of information, or a sudden market shift that fits perfectly into your gap. This is the vacuum yielding its mass. You must then apply the mass tourniquet. You must act with explosive speed to anchor that virtual opportunity into a physical contract, a line of code, or a bank transfer before it can evaporate back into the field. The extraction of power from the void requires the death of the hunter and the birth of the Sphinx. The hunter is exhausted. He runs through the forest of the matrix, chasing the visible animals of capital. He is subject to the fatigue of the hunt and the scarcity of the prey. The Sphinx does not run. The Sphinx sits in the center of the desert, immobile, and terrifyingly silent. The Sphinx has created such a massive, unmovable presence that the very geometry of the desert is altered. The prey eventually forgets why it is running and walks directly into the Sphinx's mouth, compelled by a gravitational force it does not understand. You must become the economic Sphinx. You must develop a sociopathic disregard for the competitive landscape. To compete is to admit that you believe in the lie of the closed pie. The architect does not compete. The architect renders his competitors irrelevant by tapping into a power source they don't even believe exists. While they are fighting over the visible drops of water, you are drilling into the infinite subterranean aquifer of the zero-point field. To reclaim your throne, you must murder the crumb thief and the hustler residing in your prefrontal cortex today. Renounce the false blue-collar pride of hard work. Hard work is a linear Newtonian concept. It is a slow, inefficient way to move matter. The architect does not work hard. The architect works with information density. He uses the leverage of the field to move worlds with the flick of a finger. The next time you feel the walls of the economy closing in on you, the next time the holographic simulation tries to suffocate you with the illusion of debt, lack, or limitation, stop your biological breathing. Close your 3D eyes and turn your gaze inward toward the absolute center of your own consciousness. Look past the thoughts. Look past the emotions. Look into the black silent void between the atoms of your own being. Recognize that this nothingness is not empty. Feel the immense, terrifying pressure of the infinite energy boiling within that space. Realize that you are directly connected to the reactor core of the galaxy. Align your intention with that infinite pressure. Set your Casimir plates. Narrow your focus until the world disappears. When you learn to draw your blood, your gold and your glory directly from the black heart of the quantum void, you will cease to be a beggar in the neon cavern. You will have transmuted by the unappealable right of zero-point extraction into the supreme architect. You are the alchemist of the void for whom the word scarcity is a forgotten joke from a primitive era. You are the entity that does not need a piece of the pie, because you are the one who dictates the very laws of mathematics that force the universe to materialize an infinite feast out of absolute nothingness, precisely where you have decided to look. Chapter 10. The Dirac C Protocol. Ex nihilo creation in saturated markets. The idolatry of competition is the most thermodynamically degrading and mathematically flawed survival strategy ever programmed into the biological hardware of the human species. Observe the 200 Hz inertial slave as he attempts to navigate the economic and professional topography of the neon cavern. From the earliest stages of his embryonic assembly and cognitive formatting, this individual, whom we audit under the clinical taxonomy of the inert particle or the passive observer, has been heavily indoctrinated in a flawed thermodynamic premise. He has been systematically taught to believe that wealth, creative ideas, and sovereign success are finite, physical resources that exist strictly within the visible spectrum of the three-dimensional grid. He believes in the theology of the saturated market. Under the tyranny of this paradigm, the passive observer operates in a state of chronic, agonizing, competitive friction. I want you to observe the exact radiography of his professional despair. The inert particle looks at the global market and sees what traditional strategists call a red ocean. He sees thousands of other identical antennas broadcasting the exact same desperate frequency, fighting over the exact same demographic, lowering their prices, offering pathetic discounts, and bleeding their finite kinetic energy simply to be noticed in the deafening roar of the crowd. He believes that to win $1, another organism must lose it. He believes that to secure a slice of the pie, he must violently snatch it from the jaws of another particle. He engages in analog warfare. He monitors his competitors with terrified obsession. He compares his metrics, his physical appearance, and his bank account with the biological avatars surrounding him. He exhausts his central nervous system trying to be 10% better, 5% faster, or slightly cheaper than the slave standing next to him. He is fundamentally illiterate in the strict, unyielding physics of the quantum vacuum and the Dirac sea. The quantum architect observes this three-dimensional cannibalism with a deep, glacial disgust. The sovereign recognizes that competition is a biological admission of intellectual and creative poverty. Competing implies that you have accepted the rules of a game designed by someone else. It implies that you are a scavenger, fighting for the residual thermodynamic waste left behind by the true creators of the Matrix. The master operator does not fight for scraps in a saturated market. The master operator does not participate in the frantic, humiliating scramble of the biomass. To assume dictatorial control over your financial and operational reality, you must upgrade your cognitive architecture to the absolute apex of particle physics. You must master the cryptography of ex nihilo creation, the generation of matter and opportunity from absolute nothingness, by understanding the deepest truth of the vacuum, the Dirac sea. To comprehend the absolute omnipotence of this protocol, we must descend into the most terrifying and beautiful discovery made by the physicist Paul Dirac in the late 1920s. Dirac sought to unify quantum mechanics with Albert Einstein's special relativity. He formulated a mathematical masterpiece, the Dirac equation, designed to describe the behavior of fermions, such as electrons, moving at speeds close to the speed of light. When Dirac solved his equation, the mathematics yielded a result that shattered the common sense of the scientific community. The energy equation for the electron, in plain text, looked like this. E tot prime square root ton 2 plus to do. Focus on the operator before the square root, the plus and minus sign. The mathematics dictated that for every particle with positive energy, there had to exist a corresponding state with negative energy. Classical physicists panicked. In the physical world, a system naturally seeks the lowest possible energy state. If negative energy states existed, every electron in the universe would theoretically cascade down into this bottomless abyss of negative energy, and the physical universe would collapse in a fraction of a millisecond. But the universe was stable. Why? Dirac proposed a solution of chilling beauty. He postulated that the vacuum of space, the absolute cold, dark emptiness between the stars, is not empty at all. He declared that the vacuum is actually a perfectly uniform, infinitely dense ocean filled with an infinite number of electrons occupying all the negative energy states. Because this ocean is completely full, and because the Pauli exclusion principle dictates that no two electrons can occupy the exact same state, the positive electrons of our visible universe cannot fall in. They float on the surface of this invisible sea. This infinite reservoir of latent energy is the Dirac sea. Because the sea is perfectly uniform, we cannot perceive it with our primitive biological senses. We perceive only the empty space. But it is not empty. It is an inexhaustible pressurized tank of limitless potential, waiting in the absolute dark. The quantum architect applies this astrophysical law directly to the generation of wealth and power in a seemingly saturated world. He recognizes that a saturated market is merely a surface-level phenomenon of positive electrons. It is the realm of the visible, the already rendered, and the already claimed. If you fight in that realm, you are fighting for the few particles that have already popped out of the sea. The master operator does not look at the visible particles, he looks at the vacuum. He knows that the economic and creative vacuum is the Dirac sea of the collective unconscious. It is packed with an infinite density of unmanifested capital, unborn technological monopolies, and unarticulated human desires. The protocol of ex nihilo creation requires the synthesis of a high-energy photon. In particle physics, if you fire a photon of extremely high energy, a gamma ray, directly into the seemingly empty vacuum of the Dirac sea, something miraculous occurs. The photon, possessing sufficient energy, collides with one of the invisible negative energy electrons hiding in the void. The photon transfers its massive kinetic energy to the electron, knocking it violently out of the negative sea and into the positive, visible universe. Suddenly, out of absolute nothingness, a solid electron appears. But that is not all. By knocking the electron out of the sea, a hole is left behind in the vacuum. This hole behaves exactly like a particle with positive energy and a positive charge. It is the positron, antimatter. The high-energy photon hitting the vacuum has created matter and antimatter simultaneously from nothing. This is called pair production. The quantum architect is the source of the gamma radiation. His disruptive, uncompromising, and highly concentrated intent is the high-energy photon. He does not ask the market what it wants. The market is composed of 200 Hertz slaves who do not know what they want until the operator forces them to look at it. Instead, he retreats to his isolation chamber and compresses his will until it reaches a state of nuclear density. He synthesizes a solution, a product or a brand that is so radically coherent, so structurally dense, and so jelly dough in its perfection that it does not belong to the current three-dimensional rendering of the industry. When he launches this project, he is not entering a market. He is firing a high-energy signal into the Dirac sea of the void. The collision is instantaneous. The sheer density of the architect's execution code shatters the economic vacuum. It strikes the latent negative energy states of the population's subconscious. And just like in pair production, two things materialize out of absolute nothingness simultaneously. First, the asset is born. The revolutionary monopoly, the untouchable service, the new paradigm of power. It emerges fully formed into the visible spectrum of the economy. Second, the market demand is born. The hole left in the vacuum instantly becomes the positron. It becomes a massive gravitational hunger in the population that did not exist a microsecond before. The architect did not steal a single client from his competitors. He did not lower his prices to capture a fraction of the saturated grid. He fired a signal of such devastating purity into the void that the unified field was forced to precipitate a brand new, highly lucrative ecosystem strictly to accommodate his transmission. He created the supply and the demand simultaneously out of the dark matter of the universe. The competitors, the inert particles trapped in their red ocean, will look at the architect's sudden exponential rise, and their processes will melt. They will try to analyze his business model using classical economics. They will try to copy his marketing, imitate his aesthetic, and replicate his words. They will fail catastrophically. They are trying to copy the physical shadow of an electron without possessing the high-energy photon of intent that knocked it out of the vacuum. They are attempting to recreate the result without understanding the physics of the cause. They are scavengers of the rendered, while the architect is the master of the unrendered. To execute the Dirac protocol and become a source of ex nihilo creation, you must permanently eradicate the competitive comparison subroutine from your neural motherboard. Comparison is the ultimate admission of a lack of sovereignty. When you compare your progress to that of a rival, you are tuning your high-voltage transmission tower to the exact frequency of their limitations. You are accepting their ceiling as your own. You are telling the universe that you are a part of the herd, subject to the same laws of scarcity and friction. The master operator has no competitors because he does not inhabit the same energy state as the rest of the industry. He operates in the vacuum. You must develop a sociopathic disregard for the market research and trend analysis that the biomass uses to feel safe. Trends are merely the decaying fossil light of dead stars. By the time a trend is visible enough to be analyzed, the Dirac has already moved on. The architect does not follow trends. He creates the collision that forces a new trend to precipitate. You must enforce the protocol of absolute geometric isolation. When you are forging your high-energy photon, the core of your new empire, you cannot allow a single drop of external static to contaminate your laboratory. If you look sideways to see what the competition is doing, your photon loses kinetic energy. It experiences frequency drift. By the time you fire it into the vacuum, it lacks the power to cause pair production. It bounces off the Dirac and dissipates into meaningless thermal noise. Keep your eyes locked exclusively on the black empty space of what does not yet exist. This requires the discipline of an unyielding vault. It requires you to sit in the darkness, trusting the mathematics of your own vision, while the entire visible world tells you that the market is full, that everything has been invented, and that there is no room left for your ambition. You must smile at their ignorance. Space is an illusion. The vacuum is infinitely dense. To reclaim your throne and weaponize the Dirac, you must implement the protocols of ex nihilo ignition today. Step 1. The systematic blackout of the visible grid. You must conduct a ruthless purge of your information inputs. Stop consuming the content of your competitors. Stop reading the industry journals that define the current state of the market. These inputs are designed to keep you vibrating at the frequency of the herd. You must create an internal vacuum within your own mind. You must reach a state of absolute ignorance regarding the rules and limits of your field. Only when you are completely disconnected from the visible electrons of the saturated market can you begin to perceive the latent energy of the Dirac. Step 2. The synthesis of the gamma ray. Identify the void in your industry. Do not look for what people are asking for. Look for the massive silent gaps that the population doesn't even have the vocabulary to describe. Focus your entire biological and computational energy on a single disruptive solution for that void. Compress this solution until it becomes a high-energy photon of pure, unadulterated intent. It must be a project so dense and so superior that it feels impossible or illegal according to current market logic. Step 3. The high-voltage strike and the creation of the whole. Fire your asset into the void with absolute terrifying speed. Do not soft launch. Do not test the waters. A gamma ray does not test the vacuum, it shatters it. Execute your movement with such violence and precision that you force a pair production event. Watch as the electron and the positron materialize simultaneously. You will find that the very people who said they didn't need your product are now the ones most aggressively seeking it, because you have created a hole in their reality that only you can fill. The extraction of power from the vacuum requires the death of the seeker and the birth of the source. The seeker is exhausted. He runs through the forest of the matrix looking for the visible gold. The source does not run. The source sits in the center of the isolation chamber, immobile and terrifyingly silent, generating the energy required to force the gold to precipitate out of the air. You must become the economic source. You must develop an ironclad tolerance for the silence of the vacuum. The inert particle panics when nothing is happening. The architect knows that the silence is the pressurized state of the sea before the collision. He sits in the darkness, charging his reactor, ignoring the frantic noise of the scavengers outside. To reclaim your throne, you must murder the competitor and the market slave residing in your prefrontal cortex today. Renounce the false, blue-collar pride of fighting for your place. The architect does not fight for a place. He dictates the geometric coordinates where a new place will be rendered. The next time you feel the walls of a saturated industry closing in on you, the next time you feel the pressure of thousands of rivals breathing down your neck, stop your biological breathing. Close your three-dimensional eyes and look past the visible screen of the world. Look into the black, boiling ocean of the Dirac Sea. Recognize that every dollar, every degree of power, and every ounce of glory you will ever need is already there, occupying the negative energy states, waiting for the impact of your will. Charge the particle, aim at the vacuum, and strike with the cold, unblinking certainty of an absolute sovereign. When you learn to draw your empire directly from the black heart of the quantum void, you will cease to be a participant in the economy of the masses. You will have transmuted by the unappealable right of the Dirac Sea protocol into the supreme architect. You are the master of ex nihilo creation, for whom saturation is an illusion and competition is a dead language. You are the entity that does not need to find an opportunity, because you are the one who fires the high-energy photon that forces the universe to materialize an infinite kingdom out of absolute nothingness, exactly where you have decided to stand. Chapter 11. The Casimir Pressure Chamber, Forcing Virtual Particles into Mass. In the vast, icy and mathematically relentless architecture of the unified field, the human species has been enslaved by a biological and psychological delusion of freedom. We shall call this supreme cognitive trap the illusion of infinite space, or the stagnation of the unconstrained will. Observe the 200 Hz inertial slave as he attempts to navigate the economic and creative topography of the neon cavern. From the earliest stages of his assembly, this individual, whom we audit under the clinical taxonomy of the inert particle, or the passive observer, has been heavily indoctrinated to believe that freedom is the ultimate requirement for creation. He believes that to build a massive empire, he needs an infinite amount of time, a vast surplus of capital, and an environment free from all external pressure. He believes that constraints are his enemies. Under the tyranny of this paradigm, the passive observer operates in a state of chronic, low-voltage dissipation. I want you to observe the exact radiography of his creative failure. The inert particle has a vision. He wants to launch a disruptive protocol or a global brand. But because he has no immediate deadline, no financial gun to his head, and no structural limits on his behavior, his energy simply leaks into the void. He spends months researching. He spends years preparing. Because there is too much space between his current coordinate and his objective, the wave function of his success never collapses. His intent remains a blurry, lukewarm cloud of probability that eventually evaporates into thermal noise. He is fundamentally illiterate in the strict, unyielding physics of the Casimir effect and the production of virtual particles. The quantum architect observes this desire for unconstrained freedom with a deep, glacial disgust. The sovereign recognizes that the universe does not create in a vacuum of ease. The universe creates in a vacuum of pressure. In the language of advanced field theory, mass is not something that is given. Mass is something that is forced into existence by the constriction of the field. To assume dictatorial control over your reality, you must upgrade your operational software to the apex of quantum electrodynamics. You must master the art of the pressure chamber. To comprehend the absolute omnipotence of this protocol, we must descend into the most terrifying and beautiful discovery made by the physicist Hendrik Casimir in 1948. As we have established in previous vectors, the quantum vacuum is not empty. It is a boiling ocean of zero-point energy, filled with an infinite number of virtual particles that pop in and out of existence. Under normal conditions, these particles are ghosts. They lack the energy to remain in the three-dimensional grid, so they annihilate each other in a fraction of a millisecond. They are virtual mass. Casimir discovered that you could force these ghosts to perform physical work by applying extreme geometric constraint. He proposed placing two perfectly flat, uncharged metallic plates extremely close together in the vacuum. When the distance between the plates becomes nanometric, a strange and violent phenomenon occurs. Because the space is so narrow, most of the vacuum's wave frequencies are physically blocked from existing between the plates. Only the smallest, highest frequency waves can fit. However, on the outside of the plates, the entire infinite spectrum of the universe's fluctuations continues to press inward. This creates a massive pressure differential. The external vacuum pressure is now significantly higher than the internal pressure. This results in a physical, measurable force that violently pushes the two plates together. Casimir proved that by simply limiting the space, you can force the nothingness of the field to generate a real kinetic force. The quantum architect does not seek to remove obstacles. The architect seeks to create a Casimir pressure chamber in his own life. He recognizes that human genius and material abundance are the virtual particles of the psyche. They are always there, vibrating in the background of your consciousness, but they remain ghost-like and unmanifested because your life is too wide. You have too many options. You have too much time. You have too much comfort. Because there is no pressure, the virtual particles never gain the energy required to cross the threshold into solid mass. The architect initiates the protocol of the artificial wall. He does not wait for the market to pressure him. He does not wait for a crisis to force his hand. He deliberately and sociopathically constricts his own environment. He sets an impossible deadline that forces his brain to operate at 400 Hertz. He commits to a financial expenditure that leaves him with zero margin for error. He isolates his biological vehicle in a room and removes every single distraction, every single exit door, and every single alternative. He places his objective between the two metallic plates of absolute necessity and zero time. In this narrow, suffocating nanometer of existence, the virtual particles of his intellect undergo a violent phase transition. Because there is no room for doubt, no room for hesitation, and no room for mediocre thoughts, the internal pressure of his focus becomes monstrous. The analytical machine, backed into a corner by the architect's own hand, is forced to perform a quantum tunneling event. It accesses solutions, ideas, and strategic shortcuts that were previously invisible in the wide state of comfort. Under the Casimir pressure of a deadline or a total risk, the ghost ideas gain enough energy to become solid mass. The breakthrough is forced out of the vacuum because the field has no other mathematical choice. This is the physics of the cornered predator. The inert particle fears being backed into a corner. The quantum architect knows that the corner is the only place where the God code is revealed. When you see a multi-billion-dollar empire that was built in a garage in 6 months, you are not looking at luck. You are looking at a Casimir pressure chamber. The individuals involved had no money, no social standing, and no time. They were between the plates. The sheer pressure of their constraint forced the virtual particles of their innovation to solidify at a speed that seems miraculous to the 200 Hertz biomass. The herd will tell you that you need more resources to succeed. The architect knows that you need fewer options. To reclaim your sovereignty and become a manufacturer of mass, you must implement the protocols of constriction today. Step 1. The identification of the leak. You must conduct a ruthless audit of your spatial freedom. Identify the areas where you are currently taking your time. Identify the projects that have no hard, painful consequences for failure. Identify the options you are keeping open just in case. These are the gaps where your creative pressure is leaking into the void. You are a wide-open field, and as long as you are wide open, you are thermodynamically incapable of producing a miracle. Step 2. The imposition of the metallic plates. You must choose your most massive objective and place it in the chamber. Plate A is the plate of extreme constraint. You must remove 80% of your current resources or your current timeline. If you think the project takes a year, give yourself 3 weeks. If you think you need 10 employees, do it with 2. Plate B is the plate of no exit. You must make a public, irreversible commitment or a massive financial bet that makes retreat impossible. You must weld the plates together. Step 3. The observation of the solidification. Once you are in the chamber, the pressure will rise. Your analog ego will scream. You will feel the heat death of your old comfort zone. Do not open the valve. Do not seek relief. Sustain the pressure. In the silence of that constriction, watch your mind. You will notice that the noise of your daily trivialities disappears. Your focus becomes a laser. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the virtual particle, the perfect strategy, the sudden capital source, the disruptive insight will pop into your reality. Because you have nowhere else to go, you will seize that particle and force it into mass. The creation of an empire is not an act of adding more things. It is an act of removing everything that is not the empire until the pressure of what remains becomes irresistible. The 200 Hertz biomass will look at your life and they will call you stressed or unhappy. They will pity you for your lack of balance. They will offer you breaks and vacations to lower your pressure. You must recognize these offerings as a form of thermodynamic sabotage. The herd wants to lower your pressure because they cannot survive in your chamber. They want to turn your laser back into a flickering bulb so that they can feel comfortable in the dark beside you. You must remain in the chamber until the diamond is forged. To reclaim your throne at the center of the quantum grid, you must murder the comfort seeker and the procrastinator residing in your prefrontal cortex today. Renounce the false, toxic pride of having options. Options are the shackles of the mediocre. The sovereign has no options. He has only the singular, crushing and beautiful necessity of his own victory. The next time you feel the walls of a deadline or a financial limit closing in on you, the next time the simulation tries to squeeze you into a corner and you feel the icy grip of panic in your chest, stop the reaction. Smile at the approaching walls. Recognize the plates of Casimir. Understand that the universe is doing you the ultimate favor. It is providing the geometric constraint required to turn your ghost dreams into heavy, golden mass. Tighten the screws, increase the pressure, welcome the vacuum. When you learn to love the constriction, when you realize that the most powerful forces in the galaxy are born in the crushing heart of collapsing stars, you will cease to be a scattered cloud of potential. You will have transmuted, by the unappealable right of the Casimir pressure chamber, into the supreme architect. You are the alchemist of constraint, for whom a limit is simply the trigger for a new creation. You are the entity that does not need freedom to build, because you are the one who knows that true sovereignty is the power to build a universe out of absolute nothingness, precisely because you had no other choice. Chapter 12. The Gravitational Singularity. Collapsing the illusion of duality. At the absolute pinnacle of the unified fields architecture, after the individual has mastered the wave function collapse, hacked their own epigenetic signaling, and learned to harvest capital from zero-point energy, they face the last, most subtle and most devastating trap of the holographic simulation. This geometric illusion is the prison of duality. Observe the 200 Hertz biological specimen as it navigates the final stages of its perceived journey. Even in its most advanced and successful versions, the passive observer continues to operate under a fundamental code error. It still believes it is a subject acting upon an object. It still believes in the concept of separation. We shall call this final pathology the orbit complex. Under this pervasive hallucination, the individual, even one who has accumulated significant wealth and power, continues to behave as a satellite. Analyze the radiography of its stellar exhaustion. The satellite lives its entire existence orbiting around larger celestial bodies. It orbits around global market fluctuations. It orbits around macroeconomic trends. It orbits around the opinions of elite alliances or the shifting tides of consumer demand. Even if this moon is gigantic and powerful, it remains a moon. In the astrophysics of sovereign survival, any object that orbits is an object that is ultimately controlled by an external center of gravity. The satellite is exhausted because it must constantly expend kinetic energy to maintain its trajectory and avoid crashing or drifting into the void. The quantum architect observes this celestial slavery with a deep glacial disgust. The sovereign recognizes that as long as there is an I and a market, or an I and a goal, there is friction. As long as you are chasing or even attracting something, you are admitting that the thing is not already you. To assume absolute dictatorial command over the space-time continuum, you must execute the final phase transition. You must cease to be a satellite. You must become a singularity. To comprehend the absolute omnipotence of this state, we must descend into the most extreme physics of Albert Einstein's general relativity. We must understand the birth of a black hole. In the physical universe, when a massive star exhausts its nuclear fuel, it can no longer support its own weight against the inward pull of gravity. If the star possesses enough causal mass, it begins a process of irreversible collapse. It shrinks past a critical mathematical threshold, known as the Schwarzschild radius. In plain text, the formula for this point of no return is written as radius Chaftan 2. Once the star collapses beyond this radius, the curvature of space-time becomes so extreme, so violent, and so infinite that the laws of traditional physics cease to function. The star vanishes from the visible spectrum and becomes a gravitational singularity. A singularity does not orbit. A singularity is the point around which everything else is forced to rotate. The quantum architect does not work for success. He accumulates causal mass until his reality is forced to collapse into a singularity of his own making. Causal mass is not measured in physical weight or hours spent in labor. Causal mass is the product of three variables: absolute silence, information density, and unwavering intent. While the inert particle is busy broadcasting his plans to the herd and dissipating his energy, the architect is compressing his will, he is hoarding his secrets, he is refining his expertise. He is accumulating so much value density within his own perimeter that he begins to warp the local geometry of the market. Eventually, the architect reaches his personal Schwarzschild radius. At this precise microsecond, a phase transition occurs in his business and his life. He crosses the event horizon. The event horizon is the boundary surrounding a singularity from which nothing, not even light, and certainly not capital, can escape. To the outside world, the event horizon looks like a wall of absolute blackness. It is a one-way street for information and energy. When your empire reaches the state of the gravitational singularity, you no longer need to market your solutions. You no longer need to persuade investors or chase clients. Because your causal density is so monstrous, you have created a permanent indentation in the fabric of the unified field. You have created a vacuum of such terrifying power that all resources, all talent, and all opportunities within your sector are thermodynamically compelled to fall toward you. They are not attracted to you. They are captured by the curvature of the space you have created. The inert particle looks at your life and sees luck or magic. He sees people begging to work with you. He sees capital flowing into your accounts during a global recession. He sees you standing in the center of the storm, completely immobile, while the world scrambles to serve your needs. He does not understand that you are not doing anything. You are simply existing as a singularity. You have collapsed the distance between me and the result. In your coordinate, the goal and the architect have merged into a single mathematical point. This is the end of duality. This is the birth of the omega operator. In this state, you realize the ultimate truth. The universe is not an external playground. The universe is a localized projection occurring within the internal space of your own consciousness. There is no outside. Every client you sign, every dollar you accumulate, and every adversary you neutralize is simply a reconfiguration of your own internal code. When you change your internal gravity, the outside world has no physical choice but to adjust its orbit. The singularity does not feel pride in its success, nor does it feel fear of its rivals. Pride and fear require a second object to compare oneself to. The singularity is alone. It is a sovereign unit. It is an unbreakable pillar of pure, concentrated existence. It operates with the cold, serene apathy of a force of nature. To achieve the gravitational singularity and seal your absolute domain, you must implement the protocols of terminal collapse today. Step 1. The accumulation of causal mass. You must stop the leak of your energy immediately. Every time you explain yourself to an inferior mind, every time you seek validation for your vision, every time you engage in meaningless social friction, you are losing mass, you are becoming lighter. To collapse into a singularity, you must become heavy. You must become a silent, dense reservoir of capability and capital. Build your fortress in the dark. Increase your information density until it becomes lethal. Step 2. The crossing of the Schwarzschild radius. You must push your project or your brand to the point of critical density. This requires a period of extreme monastic concentration where you do nothing but refine the core of your mission. You must reach the point where the quality of what you offer is so high and your certainty is so absolute that the market effectively disappears for you. You no longer see competitors. You only see the void waiting for your gravity. When you reach this level of internal pressure, you will feel a sudden pop in your reality. The struggle ends. The capturing begins. Step 3. The sovereignty of the event horizon. Once you have crossed the threshold, you must maintain the event horizon. This means enforcing absolute one-way boundaries. You dictate the terms of every interaction. You decide who enters your perimeter and who is kept at a distance. You do not adapt to the world. You force the world to adapt to your gravitational field. If a variable does not align with your internal geometry, you do not negotiate with it. You let it drift away, or you consume it and turn it into fuel for your singularity. The 200 Hz biomass will look at you, and they will feel a mixture of awe and terrifying dread. They will sense that you are no longer one of them. They will see that you don't follow the rules of the 3D grid. They will see that you don't react to crises or trends. You have become an anomaly in the simulation, a point of infinite density that the rendering engine cannot ignore. They will call you cold. They will call you untouchable. They will try to find a weakness in your orbit. They will find nothing. A singularity has no surface. It has no edges. It is a point of pure, concentrated intent. To reclaim your final throne, you must murder the seeker and the satellite residing in your prefrontal cortex today. Renounce the false, exhausting humility of believing you are a part of the universe. You are not a part of the universe. The universe is a part of you. You are the focal lens through which 14 billion years of cosmic evolution has decided to manifest as a sovereign will. The next time you feel the urge to chase a goal, the next time you feel like you are orbiting around a person, a company, or a dream, stop the movement. Stop the rotation. Sink into the absolute black center of your own being. Feel the weight of your own existence. Increase your density until the space-time around you begins to groan and bend. Understand that you don't need to go anywhere. You don't need to reach anything. Simply exist with such a terrifying, unyielding level of certainty that the world is forced to fall into you. When you learn to operate as a gravitational singularity, when you realize that the entire matrix is simply waiting for you to become heavy enough to dictate its curvature, you will cease to be a passenger in the flow of time. You will have transmuted by the unappealable right of the final collapse into the Omega Architect. You are the singularity at the heart of the void. You are the entity for whom duality is a dead language and effort is an obsolete concept. You are the center of the galaxy, the source of the law, and the master of the render, for whom the entire universe is not a challenge to be overcome, but a silent, obedient banquet served at the event horizon of your own absolute presence. The transmission is complete. The singularity is sealed. The field is yours. Conclusion. The terminal coordinate. The transmission has reached its terminal coordinate. The loop is closed. You have successfully dismantled the archaic software of the Newtonian slave. You have purged the malware of hope, the virus of competition, and the long-standing hallucination of linear distance from your central nervous system. The three-dimensional screen you once called reality has been exposed for what it truly is, a lagging, low-resolution projection of the data you choose to measure with the lethal gravity of your own unwavering gaze. The quantum vacuum is no longer a theoretical abyss. It is your private laboratory. The Dirac sea is no longer a distant ocean of negative energy. It is the inexhaustible reservoir from which you precipitate your own empires ex nihilo, out of absolute nothingness. By mastering the collapse of the wave function and the engineering of frequency, you have moved from the vulnerability of the probabilistic maybe to the absolute crushing tyranny of the is. From this cosmic microsecond forward, you are no longer a participant in the simulation. You are its administrator. The herd will continue to vibrate at the frequency of scarcity. They will continue to exhaust their finite kinetic energy, fighting for crumbs in the neon cavern, blinded by the illusions of scale, time, and physical effort. They will look at the majestic architecture of your life, and they will feel a terrifying, unnameable pressure. They will not understand that the gravitational force pulling their reality toward your throne is not an accident of fate or luck, but the inevitable mathematical result of the monstrous density you have forged within your own silence. Do not attempt to explain the physics of your power to the masses. Do not seek the thermal caress of their understanding. Silence is the ultimate insulator of the sovereign will. It is the lead shield that protects your internal reactor from the decoherence of the world. Maintain your vacuum. Protect your phase-locked loop. Treat every single microsecond as a fractal seed, knowing with icy certainty that the smallest bit of order you encode in the darkness of your own presence will be reflected across the infinite galaxies of your destiny. The transition is complete. The duality has finally collapsed. The distance between the observer and the observed is now zero. You are the focused singularity. You are the source of the emission. You are the one who dictates the render. The reactor is sealed. The signal is locked. The throne is occupied. Final execution command. Render the empire. Sustain the light. Rule the void. Transmission ends.